Good evening. I'd like to call our regular council meeting to order at 6 p.m. I am Mayor McNeil Smith. Good evening to colleagues in the meeting this evening. To my far left, Councillor Richard Novick, Councillor Terry O'Keefe, Councillor Chad Rentoul, Councillor Steve Duck, Councillor Sarah Duncan, Councillor Scott Garnett. Good evening to staff in attendance at the meeting, and good evening to members of the public, to those in the chamber this evening, but also to those who may be watching the live webcast or a recording of the meeting at a later date. I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that we're holding our meeting this evening in the town of Sydney is in the traditional territory of the Saanich nations, today represented by the Saanich Nation, the Sartlip Nation, the Pakwitchin Nation, the Sycam Nation, and the Mailhot Nation. In turning to approval of the agenda, we do have two changes since the agenda was published last Thursday. The first is that item 4D1 on our agenda under presentations, which was to be a presentation on a ban of fireworks. The presenter has given their regrets for this evening, and that will appear on a future agenda. The second change is that Councillor Duncan has requested providing a verbal report on her role as our Sydney representative on the CRD Regional Water Supply Commission, and that will go under 11A. And so I would seek a mover and seconder that our agenda be approved as amended. Moved by Councillor Duck, seconded by Councillor Novick. Any other changes, Council? I'll turn to Ms. Nelson.
Just the additional emails that came in, item 14A.
Thank you very much. I certainly do want to acknowledge, I've just already put them in my council package, that since the agenda was published, we have received 10 items of correspondence regarding our letter of correspondence from the City of Victoria, and they will be placed under the appropriate agenda item, which is 14A. And thank you, Ms. Nelson. So with those three changes, I'm looking to the mover and seconder. Seeing no further changes, all in favor? And that carries unanimous. Thank you. We're now turning to our public participation period, where we provide members of the public an opportunity to speak to council for up to 4 minutes. We ask that if you come forward to please provide your name, the municipality you reside in, or the organization you represent, and you will have 4 minutes to speak. We do have a participant online this evening, and I would like to say good evening to Maria O'Brien, who is online. And if you can just confirm your connection, Ms. O'Brien, and then you would have the floor.
Okay. I'm trying to... Does that let you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear now.
Okay.
And we'll let you begin.
Thank you. Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Maria O'Brien. I'm a resident of Sydney and a member of the Sydney Community Association. On 3 separate occasions this month, when I was speaking to other homeowners, encouraging them to become members of the SCA, I was asked, what are problems in Sydney that require a community organization? I responded with a few civic issues that I know about, concern for others, and I know they concern others as well. Hazard-free sidewalks, accessible door openers at businesses in downtown, adequate parking, adequate shade trees and benches, the protection of Roberts Bay, and the provision of a pool suitable for arthritic remediation within walking distance of downtown. When I paused spewing out my list of middle-class topics, I was both surprised and pleased to learn that the top-ish civic issue for these other residents of Sydney was the lack of adequate winter shelter for the unhoused residents of Sydney. The condition of unhoused people in Sydney is an issue I brought before you last winter. The response of our former CAO was that Sydney had a satisfactory system. There was no need for my concern. But a letter on your agenda tonight from Victoria's Mayor, Marianne Alto, makes it clear that Sydney does not adequately care for its share of BC's unhoused population. Sydney's current system involves restricting all citizens' access to parks and other public spaces early in the evening. Then, when people are found wandering in the town pays their bus fare or taxi fare to Victoria or Saanich. I urge you to create a local shelter, at least in the inclement months. The majority of our street people are either mentally or physically unwell. It does no honor to Sydney, British Columbia, or Canada for a municipality to ship a civic problem that it finds hard to even acknowledge off to its neighbors. It is surely municipal NIMBYism. The care of Sydney's portion of the mentally and physically unwell Canadians on our streets is Sydney's responsibility. You allocate substantial amounts of our tax dollars to the BIA for enjoyable but frivolous civic parties. I urge you to rethink your priorities. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward this evening. I'll call for a second time if there are speakers wishing to come forward. Please come forward. There's a button at the bottom of the microphone to make it live for the recording.
Mr. Mayor and councillors, my name is Kelly Duncan. I'm a resident of Sydney, and I'm also the rector of St. Andrew's Anglican Church on 4th Street here in Sydney. I'm speaking also to agenda item 14A today in support of Victoria Mayor Alto's request that Sydney establish an emergency weather shelter. At St. Andrews, we provide meals for Sydney's unhoused population 5 days a week. We also collect donations of warm clothing, sleeping bags, tarps, socks, gloves, and toques, which can be accessed by anyone in need. In addition, we provide emotional support, friendship, and a listening ear, seeking to treat others as we would like to be treated. We've been grateful to receive a grant of $2,000 from the town of Sydney in support of this ministry in 2023 and again this year in 2024. Our focus has been on building relationships with those in our community who are underhoused. We have been dependable, and as a result, our clients have found us to be trustworthy, often sharing with our volunteers their life struggles, trusting us to be non-judgmental and to show them kindness, respect, and dignity. In the winter months, many of our friends stay in Tim Hortons until it closes at 11 p.m. And then they find a nook or an overhang within which to get a few hours of sleep. Some are able to secure a warm spot near the bank at an ATM, but increasingly these areas are locked down. Our friends do what they can to pass the night until Tim Hortons opens again at 5 a.m. We need a warm and dry place for folks to get out of extreme weather here in Sydney. In an emergency, people look to their municipality for their leadership. This is why we form towns like Sydney, so that collectively we can ensure that the needs of those living here are met. Sydney offers many emergency services to those that call the town home. But the most needy and vulnerable among us are literally being left out in the cold. They are not having their needs met. Municipalities are clearly the best situated to respond to this type of emergency, which I believe is why the Mayor of Victoria is calling on municipalities to set up emergency weather shelters. The volunteers of our Friends Ministry at St. Andrews will be happy to provide advice, support, knowledge, and connections. We need the town of Sydney, the mayor and the councillors to step into their natural role as leaders in an emergency weather situation. I urge you to consider looking at starting an emergency weather shelter here in Sydney in response to the plea from the Mayor of Victoria. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward this evening. Please come forward.
Good evening. My name is Brian Head. I'm a resident of in Sydney. I am also part of St. Andrew's Anglican Church, the Friends Ministry. And I'm here to address some of the causes of homelessness. Those who live rough do not make the decision to do so. They are not unhoused because they do not want to work. The decision is not theirs to make. Circumstances in their lives are determining factors. Over the prescription of opioids for pain by doctors 10, 20 years plus years ago created many dependencies. Many of our friends are 50 to 70 years. At least one is over 80. No one chooses to have a brain trauma, or to become schizophrenic, or to be on the Asperger spectrum, or to hyperactive attention disorder, the many different types of depression, intergeneration dysfunction, resident school trauma, 50s and 60s scoop. ACE, A period, C period, E period. Adverse childhood experience is a major cause of homelessness. The many forms of abuse, multiple experiences with different forms of abuse repeated over and over again in a child's life. This list is very long. At some point, make a list of the abuses that come to your mind. At the community kitchen early summer at St. Andrew's Church, it became known that one of our friends the day was his birthday. The lights flashed on and off in the hall, and we all stood to sing happy birthday. He was 61. It was the first time in that man's life that anybody acknowledged his birthday. He left the hall, and I followed him out a few moments ago afterwards, and I put my arm around his shoulder, and that's when he revealed stories of his life and the abuse that he had suffered. Their coping strategies fail over and over again. There are resources, and one of the mainstays of our friendship is to help transition people into supportive housing. They turn to negative choices, substance abuse, multiple menus available, addictions, crime. All of these have cost to society. Please keep in mind, one always feeds the addictions first. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward. Just before our next speaker comes forward, I just ask Ms. O'Brien if you could disconnect and watch the live web stream so that we have the use of the screen in the chamber. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'll just ask if you can make the microphone live just with the button at the bottom there, please. Thank you.
Red. Mayor and councillors, my name is Lois Aney. I'm a resident of Sydney and a volunteer of the Friends Food Delivery and Brunch Bunch programs offered by and at St. Andrew's Church. I'm speaking to agenda item 14A today in support of Victoria Mayor Alto's request that Sydney establish an emergency weather shelter or temporary housing. The underhoused in Sydney, these people, are, as is sometimes coined to describe the homeless in our midst, are citizens of Sydney, equal to you and me. The volunteers of St. Andrew have found our friends to be intelligent, respectful, sensitive, and generous people. They and themselves form a community within a community, sharing with each other as they are able. They are appreciative of the food, clothing, friendship, and support which we offer them. In this town of affluence, I wonder how many of our tax-paying citizens are but 3 months away from being without food or shelter. Perhaps more than you think. I wonder. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll turn to the next speaker. Please come forward.
Mayor, Councillor, and all those present here. I'm Cheryl Applewhite, and I'm a resident of the town of Sydney, and with Lois Aney.
Sorry, if you can turn on the microphone.
Oh, how did it go off? Okay, should I start again?
Please do.
I, Cheryl Applewhite, am a resident of the town of Sydney, and with Lois Aney, who presented prior to my presentation, we came before council on January 30th, 2023, to present on the need of a temporary severe weather shelter to be located in this town. A year has passed, And I continue to volunteer with the Friends program at St. Andrews, and tonight I'm here to speak to the request of the mayor that many have already mentioned. So she in her letter, it's quoted that she asks that an emergency warming center for the unhoused be created in these communities during extreme weather events. So the need for a shelter continues to exist. The inclement weather is fully present to us, think of last week, and is expected to worsen both in frequency and intensity. So basic shelter requirements are that we require a community of users for the shelters, and I think it's fairly clear that we do have that community. Pastor Kelly and others have noted that they are very present. We need a physical location within the town of Sydney. A pre-existing facility would be ideal because the need is temporary. For instance, we do have an emergency cooling center that is already operational within the town. Community users and a location in Sydney are key points. Our unhoused are part of our community. The current option of a bus ticket to Victoria during inclement weather does not address many humane needs, such as personal safety and protection of their possessions, the fear of leaving a community that you trust, and the possibility that on arrival in Victoria there's no room in the inn. Hope is the belief that you can transcend in some form the limitation of the present condition. It is our hope that with the assistance of the mayor and council and the town staff and the many who support the Friends program, that we can transcend this present situation in Sydney. Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward. I'll turn to the next speaker. Please do.
Hi, my name is Rachel Pendray, Mayor and Councillors. I am here to talk about 13A, the Boulevard tree removal request for my home, Judson Place. I'm one of the homeowners. I'm here with my father-in-law as well. We had an issue with this tree last year because it grew into our sewer system and backed up our toilet in our house. We had to call Rival Root or get them to come clear the line. They said it was the city's issue. The city has told us now that they won't pay for us getting the line cleared and all this. So we've requested that the city remove the tree because it's growing back into our line. Rival Rooters told us it'll probably happen again. And we're just here to ask if you can reconsider the recommendation that's on here that you're gonna deny our request to have the tree removed because it's just gonna keep growing into our sewer line. We're gonna have to keep fixing it. So that's our request. Thanks.
Thank you for coming forward tonight. Good evening.
I'm kind of a follow-up to that statement. I'm also one of the owners of that house, one
Your
of the
name,
main
sir?
owners. And I
Sorry,
dealt with the city
sir?
employees.
Your name, sir?
My name is William Pendray.
Thank you.
And I sent, I think it's later on the agenda, the reasons why I want that tree taken out. It's been very costly so far with the sewer problem. And the roots also got into the storm drain. The trunk is 10 feet away from my driveway where both lines come out. I think the previous owner had some problems with the storm drain too, because there's been some digging near the house there. Anyways, my plumber came on a long week and I could barely get one. My son's a contractor, so we got one of his friends to come on overtime and had to take the basement toilet out, run a snake through and a camera. The plug was right at the city connection. He went through that. He went all the way to the road as far as he could go. That cleared it out. That was fine. Then the city came and put in an inspection chamber. So future, if any other problems arise, we can see it. And before that, this tree has been uplifting the curb on the road. Now it's lifting up the road. They scored the road 2 years ago, supposedly to fix it. And that hasn't been done. I mean, the front boulevard is just a mess. And the roots come down from that tree also farther down my driveway. And they're probably all underneath, following those two lines to the house. I can't repave the driveway because it's been lifted. And so I'm in a conundrum what to do here. I mean, I've asked for the top decision makers to come out and actually have a look at it. And I'm requesting that a mayor or some of these top councilors that make the decisions come out and look, because it's actually a disgrace. It's going to cause future damage. The tree sits and trunk sits right on top of the main sewer line by that curb. And on the other side, the roots are heading to my water line. Now, I don't want any more problems or any more expense from this tree, and I'm not going to pay for it. And I planted 2 trees closer up to the house, away from any sewer, storm drain lines, water lines. They won't damage the road or the curb. And if the city can take that tree out and fix the curb properly, which is what your tree arborist also recommended, then everybody can be happy. And it'll improve the appearance of the neighborhood, and I can clean up my yard and pave the driveway. And that's why I'd like somebody senior to come out and have a look at it. That's all I ask. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to come forward tonight, sir. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, just one moment, please. Go ahead.
I'll move that we extend public participation.
Second. We have it moved and seconded. All in favor? None are opposed. The motion carries. Please continue, sir.
Good evening. I'm Scott Davies. I'm a resident of Victoria. However, I do have several development projects here in Sydney. One of them being 2114 Beacon Ave West, which we all talked about last week at the committee of the whole meeting. And I just wanted to let you know tonight that we heard loud and clear what you guys said on last Monday, and we are revising the plans to come back with a reduced variance proposal for the parking, and hopefully something that we can all agree on. So I just wanted to let you know that, and yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you for coming forward. Appreciate it. I'll call for a last time if anyone's wishing to come forward to speak to council. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. David Calverley. I'm a resident of Sydney. Actually, I was going to speak on 2114 Beacon Avenue West, and I really appreciate the gentleman who spoke before me, because I think that was a very good move. We need some time to think about what's happened there. I will just comment that I was part of the working committee when the West Lap was put together, and it needs a bit of rethinking, and it needs some real guidance. It's not what we had in mind. So that leaves me a moment to talk about a subject that several people have spoken this evening, and done so eloquently, and that's people needing somewhere to sleep when it's cold. I don't think I can go into details, but I would just say that I know how important that is. They've said it better than I am. I know. Thank you.
Thank you. And seeing no other speakers coming forward, I will close public participation. Thank you to all who took the time to come forward this evening. We're next turning to a presentation under 4D2, which is regards the ArtSea 2025 funding. We have presenters this evening, Wendy Woollard, Treasurer, and Ethel Mailhot, President of the ArtSea Community Arts Council of the Saanich Peninsula. Good evening, ladies. Please come forward at your... Yeah.
This is what 5 hip replacements looks like. Okay. And I'm getting better. My name, good evening, everyone.
Sorry, if you could just activate the microphone, please.
I've been watching this all night and not doing it.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ethel and I am the president of ArtSea. ArtSea is a branded name, which I don't like. We are the British Saanich Peninsula Arts Council. And we started in 1991. I've been a volunteer for 22 years, and I think I've had every position there is. It's a nonprofit organization that supports art and cultural activities across the Saanich Peninsula. It's governed by a board of directors, there's 6 of us, and achieves the goals through the valued contribution of dedicated staff and volunteers. ArtSea operates within the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people. ArtSea provides approximately 13 little programs that we create. You might know the gallery at Talitsa, or the arts on the gallery, or the Salish Sea Lantern Festival, or the ArtSea Studio Tour, which goes the whole peninsula, the Sydney Business Art Walk, or the Sydney Seaside Sculpture Walk, which we just finished in May, and I think a lot of people enjoy that. And we also have the Diane Cross Award for students in schools. We also run for you and the town of Sydney, or the District of North Saanich, sorry, the Saanich Peninsula Arts and Culture Grant Program. And we have been working with that, giving out monies to Sydney and to North Saanich, and people like, for example, Via Chorale, Palm Court Orchestra, a new group called Echo Group. We also have a Coast Capital display in both Sydney and in Sydney. And we also have our website record. We have over 4,000 people a month visiting us, and we have a social media post, which is a newsletter, and we have approximately 1,200 subscribers. So we're a busy group of people working on a very small staff. We also had in the past done the Sydney Art Show, and because of COVID and shortage of finances, we had to discontinue that, but it's always been a dream of mine to have it back. We are asking you tonight to look at us as part of the cultural regional arts ecosystem that we supply to your area. And we provide cultural benefits to the entire peninsula, island, and Victoria. It's hard to believe I was a teacher and I can hardly speak. ArtSea programs made it easier for small groups and individuals to participate in the regional art ecosystem, and it's a broad participant bringing in money to Sydney and visitors, and we have visitors from all over the world come see our little place. Noticeably, North Saanich and Victoria, they've been slowly moving in, and we have to work on addressing that because our programs are primarily for Sydney and North Saanich, and Central Saanich, obviously. So I'm going to let you listen to Wendy, and she's going to give you the facts. She's our treasurer, if I can get back.
Thank you.
I'm kind of surreal.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. First of all, I apologize for my voice. It is what it is. My name is Wendy Woollard, and I am the new 2024 ArtSea Treasurer. I feel our needs are very frivolous compared to things that have been brought up tonight, and we do understand that money is not infinite. As per the funding chart on page 4, if you have our presentation with you, you will see that this year ArtSea is about $55,000 below our grant ask income, and this has exacerbated problems. We recognize many nonprofits are in exactly the same situation, and the question then is, will this funding shortfall continue? And the word on the granting street is yes. If yes, does the community at large wish to provide the extra funds to keep the Community Arts Council going? Looking at the bottom of page 4, you see Sydney gives ArtSea $25,000 a year operating funds, $26,800 in SPAC grant funds, and $3,000 to administer the sculpture walk. The SPAC grant funds cannot be used for operations. The sculpture walk is now completed. The town also donates our gallery at Tulista, which is our most loved program. The SPAG grants encourage smaller local artistic groups. The municipal funds are our only stable income. Financial history, how did we get here? From its inception to 2020, ArtSea was financially stable, mainly due to the Sydney Fine Art Show. Sydney Fine Art Show started in '02 with generous funding from the Heritage Foundation. It created a rolling cash flow that helped to fund the other programs, such as the Lantern Festival. When COVID hit in 2020, it absolutely decimated ArtSea. The Sydney Fine Art Show stopped. The board was reduced to 2 active members and 1 paid admin staff. All committee heads and volunteers left. There were no programs, no income, nothing to keep ArtSea in the public eye. And the 2 board members who kept it going both got sick. During this period in 2021, Sydney initiated the grant program. Needless to say, there was little uptake in the first 2 years as people shied away from public engagement. Generous, resilient grants kept the Arts Council alive and able to restart. In 2022, the gallery reopened, but with only 2 board members and no volunteers, ArtSea had to hire a part-time gallery coordinator, and that $30,000 payroll addition has been identified as one of our sources of loss. In 2023, ArtSea resumed full programs, received full grants, but had a loss of $24,000. Also in 2023, the SPAG grant program began to flourish and more applications for grants continue to grow, and we hope to do more promotion with art groups in 2025. We've been trying to rebuild our board and our volunteers. We currently have 2 active board members, 4 non-active, and a small new body of willing volunteers. Referring to page 6 shows our year-to-date and projections to March 31st. In May of this year, the Victoria Foundation declined us after years of funding, and we were not prepared for that. We asked why, and we were told it's because the homeless and hungry came first. When they got to us, there was no money left. It taught us that nothing is known until we receive the check. Therefore, we need to develop a cash cushion to cover the winter months in January to April when we have no real income coming in. What have we done to help ourselves? See details on page 7. We've raised our program income as much as we can by raising rents and membership, and for next year we should increase that by $6,000. This year we raised sponsorships of $18,000 due to 2 years of effort from a paid fundraiser who is retiring. We've cut expenses this year by approximately $11,000 due to doing it in-house, online, and donations. Our 2025 payroll will be down approximately $30,000 due to retirement, if we can replace it with volunteers. We've asked North Saanich to increase our income to $20,000 from $7,500. Other proposals, we've looked at renting out the gallery in the winter months, but with the costs of a manager and utilities, it's a break-even prop. We've looked at cutting programs, and the question is, if you see on page 8 all the pros and cons of which ones to cut. We've commenced a member fundraising campaign, and we will be following that with a press campaign. So, how can the town of Sydney help? Let me start by saying we are not asking Sydney for more money. Sydney is extremely generous. After taking advice, we are asking the town of Sydney to permanently redirect $25,000 of the current cumulative SPAC grant funds to ArtSea operations, and to redirect the annual $3,000 sculpture admin money to the SPAG admin, so that with a view to further outreach. We would aim to use this as a financial cushion or like a revolving loan. We would take it out in January as we need it and put it back into the account when our grants come in April and May. If our granting improves to the point where we have regular savings, we would return the money to the SPAG account, to the SPAG fund. I'm hoping that under the circumstances, you can see fit to help us, but we also understand that, as I said, money is not infinite. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wendy Woollard, for coming forward. If you could stay at the podium.
Yes.
So with receiving your submission, your package and your presentation, this is an agenda item for council discussion at this time.
Okay.
There is a recommendation for staff, which we will come to at some point. But what we would like to do is ask if you could take some questions from
Sure.
members of council.
Let me get my notebook so I can write them down.
Absolutely. We may have some questions. We'll try not to ask questions that you don't have the answers with you this evening. And I'll begin with Councillor O'Keefe, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for all that ArtSea does. I think you did a good job, listing off all the different activities you do on a shoestring budget. I think it's important work you do to bring vibrancy to our community. It brings in people from outside of Sydney, so contributes to economic development. So thank you for that. So I just want to clarify my understanding of what you're asking for here. So my understanding of things is that when we started providing money for the SPAC, for the grants, because it came around COVID time and it took some time to recover, you ended up with a surplus of funds through the grant program that you haven't been able to hand out. But you're continuing to give out grants on an ongoing basis, and you plan to continue to give out grants. So you're wanting to use that roughly $25,000 to get you through this rough patch and hopefully to the end of 2025. And you're hoping that if North Saanich provides some additional funding and a few other things come through, that might be enough for you to continue, say, for the following year. So
We certainly hope so.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify
Yes.
that was the case. So
Yes.
you're not asking for, when you say permanently take the 25,000, it's not permanently like into the future. It's just like that amount of money that's there right now, and that you want to just use that for all.
Right now, there's about 46.6 in the SPAG account. And we were looking at taking 25 of that semi-permanently, as long as we needed it. And we would pay it back if the grant situation recovered. And the big thing is if North Saanich ups their game.
Right.
And also with the 30,000 reduction in our payroll, the things should look better if we can find enough volunteers to cover the jobs that person was doing. But the volunteer situation is opening up as COVID recedes in people's memory. We seem to be getting more volunteers coming in. So yes, it's a permanent request in as much as we don't know when we can pay it back. But it is our intention to put it back into the SPAG funds as soon as we can. On the other hand, there's no point in putting it back and then having to come to you and ask for it again. Right. Because every spring, I mean, our grants come in from basically the end of April to end of May. And we don't know what we're going to get until May is over. And in January to the beginning of May, end of April, we really don't get much income of any kind. So there's this sort of vacuum in funding. So that's, yeah.
Okay.
Have I answered your question, Terry?
Yep,
Okay,
no, I
thank
think
you.
I've got it right. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Gurnett, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you both for your presentation. Thanks for being here this evening, and as Councillor O'Keefe said, for the work you do in our community. It's very much appreciated. You mentioned in here that Central Saanich gives you $10,000. It says for the next 3 years. Can you tell me when that actually ends?
It started, 2024 was the first year, so we have 3 more years.
Okay, and at this point, you don't know whether that's continual. So I'm wondering, have you, when you looked at your forecasting, have you anticipated that not being there?
We haven't forecasted that far forward. Right now, we'd like to make sure we get through 2025.
That's a fair
we have no idea, honestly, whether they will continue with it or not. One of the things we're trying to do is bring more of our programs to Central Saanich. They're sort of peripheral, and we're really trying to engage them more so that it will continue, but you know, we don't know.
No, and that's a fair statement. Appreciate that. I'm looking the balance you quoted right now. We have in our package 46,366.
Yeah.
And I noticed that you gave out quite a bit more in 24 as opposed to 23, about $5,000 more.
Yeah.
And taking 25 out of that would leave a balance of 21,366. And given that you gave out 21,385 last year, are you concerned that you might not be able to match what you would normally grant people, given that that's what the money's for?
Well, we know that we get your income, the next tranche, in late April, you know, early May, and we can probably push the grants out a little, you know, award them a little later so that we can get into the income in May.
Thank you. That's all for now. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Gurnett. Not seeing other questions, or Councillor Ethel.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation and for your diligence and commitments to the organization. I'm sure it must be daunting to have 2 active board members and what feels like a tremendous amount of responsibility, and it is. So thank you for your service and your interest to the arts community. Maybe just speak for a moment. One of the things, obviously, when the town grants to not-for-profit organizations that we like to feel some surety around is ongoing success. Everyone wants to see, you know, this money, which we steward on behalf of taxpayers, you know, put into engagements where, you know, we look to see, for lack of a better expression, the return on investment, and that it's going to be a successful endeavor. So talk to us a little bit. You noted in the report challenges recruiting board members. You have some who are inactive right now. This is a stage, I think, a forum perhaps for you to maybe help make that appeal for other active board members, because I think volunteerism, this community is very gracious, very generous with its time, and would likely resonate with either some listening or members of council who know that you have a plan actively trying to recruit the sort of help that you need to ensure the success.
One of the issues with Sydney is that it is a small community, and the same people volunteer for everything, you know, particularly in the arts world. I'm also a member of a SPAC, which is the Saanich Peninsula Arts and Crafts, and which is a big group with almost 500 members now, and I volunteer there. I used to run their show, and it's the same people who do it all, and a lot of us are aging. However, what we have noticed is that with this year and COVID in the rear mirror, that we are having a lot more people coming out of the woodwork, coming into the gallery and saying, gee, I really like this, you know, how do I volunteer? So we don't at this moment in time have a specific plan to recruit volunteers. The lady who is leaving, Save Us 30,000, was doing that job as well as running the gallery, and she did a great job. And we now have another person that she inveigled into the group who is looking to maybe replace her. So we're hoping that she will be able to also recruit more volunteers. I can't answer your question with any honesty.
Yep. Thank you.
We, as far as how is ArtSea going to survive, COVID literally flattened it, and it is gradually coming back. And I think that 2025 is going to be okay. And that's all I can say.
Well, thank you. And I won't profess to, look for an answer on this, but you and your colleagues who are actively involved, you mentioned SPAC as one example, and there are many arts organizations on the peninsula. Have you had conversations with those organizations about some synergies, maybe working together as you move forward?
Yes, and for instance, the art in the Coast Capital Savings, that has been run by ArtSea, and the people who have been doing it free with no charge for their time and gas are stepping down, and we have decided we're not going to continue with it, but we're going to, for instance, ask the SPAC people, not SPAC, if they would like to take it over, because they have lots of members, and and the artists have a skin in the game because they'd like to display their wares.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for those comments, and I commend you again for your dedication to trying to see
Thank
this
you.
successful.
Thank you.
Forward. Thank you.
Thanks. Good evening.
Oh, sorry, I'm Miss, yeah, if you could come forward. I do have a couple of questions just before council starts to consider a recommendation. No, thank you. And I'll follow my colleagues in expressing appreciation for the work the volunteers do, and that your staff do as well. My first question is just to sorry, I'll leave that for now. My first question is with regards to the sculptural walk. So in our total of $54,800 in funding, we're providing $3,000 for the sculpture walk. It notes in your information that you provided to us that the sculpture walk is complete.
That's my understanding, that this 2024 was the completion of the sculpture walk.
So in terms of ArtSea claiming the sculpture walk is complete, we provided that $3,000 in funding for 2024. Is that being used for?
No, it arrived and we gave it back. I think that's correct, Andrew, is it? I believe so.
I'll turn to Mr. Hissick for just a moment.
The 3,000 was not provided in 2024 because that agreement ended, and ArtSea chose not to renew it at that time. And now they're asking for that 3,000 for a different purpose, but no, they didn't get it this year.
Thank you for clarifying that. It's just in the information you provided for tonight's council meeting, you did make reference to the total of $54,800, which includes that 3,000. So, so it is the $54,800 is less 3,000 for this year. So thank you for clarifying that. You directed us in your information to look at the latest annual report for ArtSea, which is the calendar end of 2023. On your website, and in taking a look at that, it speaks to restricted cash or restricted account, which you made some reference to this evening in terms of the Saanich Peninsula Arts and Culture Program grants. Those are restricted funds that Sydney gives. But otherwise, there is $54,000 internally restricted as of the end of 2023. And it said the board has internally, in the note, these are notes to the audited financial statements, the board has internally restricted $54,000 to be used towards future costs of acquiring a new premises. As the town of Sydney estimated in 2017 that the remaining useful life of the current premises was 5 years.
Correct.
So can you confirm that you do have $54,000?
No, but I can confirm that having discussed this with Mr. Hissick, he sent out engineers to check the building so that we would know exactly what we were faced with. And the engineers said that in their opinion, with some maintenance, that it was good for the foreseeable future. So we decided, since money was tight, that we would not keep that reserve of $54,000, which in today's terms wouldn't buy much in the way of a premises anyway. So so we have used that. That is it's in our operating money, but it's no longer reserved. We unreserved it.
Okay, so I do appreciate that these were financial statement at the end of 2023, December 31st, and that this was the decision taken by the board in 2024. we certainly express appreciation to you working with staff, Mr. Hissick and the other town staff that help, maintain the building to continue its.
One of the comments, just while we're talking about the other members of the staff, I'd like to thank the people in the maintenance department who come to our rescue with mice and rats and vagabonds and everything at the gallery. They are absolutely wonderful.
Thank you for acknowledging the good work of staff. So I mentioned that, and thank you for the clarification, in that you had a one-time $54,000 come into 2024 revenue. It looks like because of the unfortunate denial of 3 significant grant requests, and those were all reasonable grant requests to organizations like the Victoria Foundation and otherwise. But going into 2025, you're not going to have a replacement for that $54,000.
Correct.
It's a one-time.
Well, it was always in our funds. It was just in our minds. It was reserved, kind of thing.
But you've had the use of it on a one-time basis. Have you generated a 2025 budget?
We have.
Given unique circumstances.
Yes,
and
we have.
what is the forecast
I don't have it with
shortfall?
me. I'm sorry. I should have brought it, and I don't have it with me. The
Okay.
it's like 35,000. Well, I mean, we budgeted for nothing in terms of grants because we just don't know. So it was an absolute worst kind of budget.
And we've lost 2 employees in the near future past, so their salaries will now hopefully go into the budget to help it up.
No, thank you for that clarification. And a question that was partially addressed is when the staff departures were mentioned, was that there was a need for in recent years there was a need for increased staff because of a shortage of volunteers.
Yeah, because of COVID, basically. When we started to open the gallery in 2022, we had 2 board members, one of whom had long COVID, and 1 administrator. So we had no volunteers. We had nobody, so we had to hire somebody to run the gallery.
So understanding then, part of the plan is that with these staff having left, with the pandemic hopefully far behind us, you are seeing increased volunteers, and that will help do some of the work that was previously a cost.
That's the plan.
Thank you. Those are all my questions for now. Thank you. I'll turn to council if there are any second-time questions. Not seeing any. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
We'll give you a break. We appreciate that it's not fun coming forward.
No, that's
to
fine. I'm
ask
just
council
sorry.
and
I
public
didn't
for
have the
money.
budget with me, but it's not pretty, but we designed it that way on purpose, so, okay, thank you.
Thank you for everything. Could you, sorry, we'll just turn the microphone off if we could, please. Oh, sorry, we may have, did you want to?
I just wanted to say one thing.
Please come to the mic if you could, just for the benefit of those who might be listening online.
Oh, gosh. You don't know what I want to say.
I'll wait here for it.
Okay, thank you. One thing I just wanted to say when you were asking about the staffing and the leader at the Peninsula, I was the lead person, the volunteer, the head of the gallery. And the reason why we hired that second employee is that I went through 3 operations in 1 year. I had one February, April, and then September, and then I had another one this September. I was the person responsible. I had all the volunteers, and that just went flat line. So the board went ahead and hired someone. We're not hiring her anymore. She had to leave. And so I'm going back in with a few volunteers, and I'm actually going to interview one tomorrow. She's a project manager, retired, and I'm hoping to get her on the board and also to be the lead at the gallery. So we are building, and it will come. It will grow again, but it just needs a little bit of new blood. Okay?
Thank you for coming forward. Thank you for all your efforts.
listening.
You're welcome.
Ooh, where are you?
You can dance. So, council, we do have a recommendation before us. I would look to a member to either move that recommendation or move an alternate recommendation. Councillor Novak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I would just take a moment to thank ArtSea for the presentation. And we all appreciate the great work you do in supporting the arts on the peninsula. And I'm quite happy to make the recommendation. I move that ArtSea be permitted to redirect $25,000 previously provided by the town for their arts grants program to their operations budget.
I'll second that.
We have it moved and seconded. I will turn to the mover and seconder, please. Councillor Novak.
Thank you. I think the presentation said it all. I'm confident in the fact that this isn't going to require any additional funds, that this is simply a redirection to temporarily manage their finances. It's more of a cash flow issue, I believe, for them. And this would go a long way towards helping them. I don't believe it would cause an inconvenience to the town, and I don't believe it should affect any future funding programs for the organization. So I believe it's a worthwhile effort. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novak. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I would characterize this as a COVID hangover. You know, still trying to, you know, kind of coming out of it now. And I think based on what I see in terms of you know, staff reductions, more volunteers coming forward, I think there might have been the impression that there's just 2 board members now, but there's actually there's 6 board members now. So so that 2 board members was during COVID. So the board is expanded, volunteers are expanded, making pitches to North Saanich for additional funds. So those things make me hopeful about being able to carry on. The intention is to still give out the grant funds that we allocate each year. So I'm hopeful and supportive of this moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Gurnett, then Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Chair. And if I may, through you to staff, if I could ask a question.
Please.
I'm just curious, there's the ask for the $3,000 in there, which is not in the recommendation. So is that something we should approach, or how would staff like to handle that portion?
It'll be addressed in the upcoming budget.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff, if I may, there was a reference during the presentation to taking this approach based on advice. The source of the advice wasn't declared, but I seek perhaps clarification that staff have been, you know, comfortable with the dialogue and the remedy that's being suggested here for a first part, and for a second part, the grant funding that's been referenced here. Is that currently in the 5-year budget? Do we benchmark for that longer term already? I recognize we're referring to funds already on hand in this case, but just looking to the future, because I think maybe some longer term surety is likely going to be in order here, and so I'm curious if it was in the 5-year plan. Thank you.
Mr. Hisek.
Yes, thank you. We have had extensive discussions with ArtSea on this matter, myself. Honestly, I think we arrived at this solution concurrently, as opposed to just me recommending it. I think they were on the same wavelength, which is gratifying. As for the ongoing funding, yes, the annual amount of $54,800 is a line item in our annual budget going forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Duck.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I am in favor of this motion because I think it's a good solution to a tough problem that an organization is facing. And certainly they've looked at many different solutions to work around this, and this is kind of where they've been left, and they continue to look for volunteers and further avenues for funding. And I do appreciate that they have a full intent to refund this money, if you want to say, back to the granting program. So I think their best efforts are going to be going forward to keep themselves alive so that they can put that money back into the fund and they can give it out as a grant. So I think they've chosen a tough road, but they're willing to work on it and make it happen. So I'm in favor of seeing this go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll speak for a moment. I appreciate the information that's been provided to council. I appreciate all of the efforts on the part of ArtSea volunteers and staff, as touched on earlier. Just a bit of background. One is, from the information that you've provided, is your total budget in, so you made reference to the annual report in 2023, at the end of 2023, and your revenues that year were a total of 172,000 or 173,000. And in the information you provide to council tonight, you're indicating that your revenues will be a total of 158,000. On the sheet it mentions 128,000, but that's not including the other grant funds of 24/6. So it is a total of 158. I just want to note that of your total revenues of 158,000 this year, the town of Sydney with its 54.8 is providing 35% of the funding to ArtSea. Central Saanich with its $10,000 grant is providing 6%, and North Saanich with its $7,500 grant is providing 5%. We appreciate that you have approached those other municipalities, and they're doing what they can, and they're making further considerations. And the town of Sydney is also providing the park space for the building that was donated many years ago. And again, we're appreciative to staff for the maintenance and upkeep that they provide for the exterior of the building that helped keep it there. So I think council, past and present, has been committed to the success, seeing the success of ArtSea through gradual increased funding, through the support of the gallery in the building. I found very interesting, and I'm not sure it's been broken out this way before, but in the package of information you provided tonight, you do provide the different programs, and they're long-running programs and very successful programs in Sydney and on the Peninsula. But for example, 2024 ArtSea membership by location, you mentioned, I think, something like 1,100 or 1,200 members. 22% are from Sydney, 23% are from North Saanich, 12% from Central Saanich, 34% are from the rest of Greater Victoria, and 10% are from the Gulf Islands elsewhere on Vancouver Island. So it's interesting that we have this little gallery in Sydney, and ArtSea headquartered there, if you will, and it's certainly benefiting local artists, but it's benefiting 75% of the artists benefiting are actually outside of the area. ArtSea gallery renters, so you do provide the space to artists. 20% of the renters are from Sydney, 53% from Victoria. I won't read the other statistics, but what I'm getting at here is, while we're a significant funder, the benefit to artists outside of Sydney is quite significant. We've been supportive of that in the past, and we'd like to see your organization continue to be successful. One of my concerns is, in recent years, coming forward to request the grant funds that we're now providing of 24,800 or 26,400, is Sydney Council deliberated at length on that. The reason being is the town of Sydney was a member of the CRD Performing Arts Granting Fund for a period of about 8 years. 8 or 9 years, and council took the decision last term, or sorry, the council that ended in 2018 chose to withdraw from that funding. And while council did consider rejoining that fund, a new council, predominantly new council in 2019 considered rejoining that funding, the decision by council was to not go back to providing grant funding or funds for granting performing art funding through the CRD. It was to create this new $26,000 fund to ArtSea for Sydney and Peninsula artists. And we understand the challenges of the pandemic. You are still recovering from the pandemic. But that is seen to be valuable or valued by the arts groups in Sydney and on the Peninsula. And my concern is that by approving the motion that is on the floor as is, if ArtSea continues to have financial pressures, we are freeing up all of those grant funds on an annual basis for them to use in their operating. And that has the potential, has the possibility that there will not be a granting program to the performing arts organizations in Sydney and the Peninsula, and that's a concern for me. I would be more in favor, given the changing circumstances within ArtSea, and there's some positives in terms of having more volunteers, you'll have less expensive salary, and so on, that I would prefer to, and given that you have a surplus, I'm using the term surplus in that you haven't granted all of the $26,000 in each of the last 2 years, so there is a surplus. I think it's noted at about $46,000, and that sort of thing, is that you go ahead and use the funds for the next year, for the budget that you've produced and for the granting that you're going to go into with the changes in salary and volunteers, is that you do that for 2025. And I have some confidence, I have some optimism that things will continue to turn for the better for ArtSea. But I'm going to suggest an amendment. Normally the chair doesn't make amendments or motions, but having listened to all other members of council, I would make an amendment to this motion. Sorry, if you could read it back, Ms. Nelson.
Yes, that ArtSea be permitted to redirect $25,000 previously provided by the town for their arts grants program to their operations budget.
And so my amendment is for 2025, for the year 2025.
Second for discussion.
So we have a seconder for discussion. We normally don't invite the presenters or speakers back to the podium, but I do see a presenter raised her hand. Please come forward if you have a question or a comment you wish to make. And there is the microphone still there for you.
My question is what?
Sorry, the microphone?
My question is, how would you like us to handle it at the end of 2025, like to pay it back?
So all of our community organizations, the town is providing in excess of $1 million in grant funding support to many organizations across the community. And each of those organizations comes forward each year with their annual report telling us what was good last year, some of the challenges you're facing, and what the year ahead looks like. You're making your presentation this evening. We appreciate that. And so when you make your annual presentation, perhaps in the fall of next year, you can hopefully provide us good news, and if there are ongoing challenges, then council can consider it then. But I don't want to motivate while I'm speaking,
Yeah, no, I
talking
understand.
to a speaker, but I did want to answer your question.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Thank you. So it moved and seconded. I'll just motivate further because just for a moment, actually I won't motivate further. I think I've said enough. I'll turn to the seconder, Councillor Gurnett, or Councillor Rentoul. You're gonna have to switch seats.
Thank you. I'm just prepared to listen to what my colleagues have to say at this point. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, I'm not sure we need this motion. I mean, my understanding of what's gonna happen is there's this 25,000 roughly amount that's a surplus that's been sitting there, and
Sorry,
that's.
I'm just gonna interject for a moment. Councillor O'Keefe, you said this motion is not required. Is the amendment not required? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, sorry, yeah, no, so I'm having.
So there's an amendment on the floor.
Yes, yeah,
Okay,
and so
please,
that's.
go ahead.
Yeah, that's what I'm speaking to, and so I'm just trying to clarify the intent and my understanding, because my understanding is that it was just going to be for 2025. And that they weren't necessarily asking us to provide another 25,000 every year, that they were going to use this 25,000 to get them through 2025.
I see a hand for Mr. Hissick.
Okay, so needed some clarity on that.
Mr. Hissick.
Okay, thank you. Just to clarify, this is a one-time reallocation of $25,000. Whether it comes from the balance currently accumulated or from next year's allocation, I think the reason to do it from the currently held amount is as a cash flow benefit to ArtSea. So currently that balance is just under 50,000. They'll reallocate 25. The town will essentially replenish it in the spring to get them close to 50 again. And they've never been able to get more than 30,000 out the door in a given year, so I think they're okay. It's just better to let them allocate funds they're already holding than future funds that we'll be giving them in the spring, if that's the intention.
Thank you, Mr. Isick. Councillor O'Keefe?
Yeah, and that's kind of what my understanding was, so, so I don't feel there's a need for the amendment, and so I won't support it because I don't think it's required.
Okay, so
Thanks.
thank you. I do have a question for the presenters. I appreciate the discussions you've had with Mr. Isick. It is your understanding that this would be a one-time $25,000 allocation? Sorry, the microphone, please.
When you say one time, we are only asking for one lot of 25,000 from the accumulation. But we would like to have it available on a rolling basis so that it's not going to be a new 25,000, it's going to be the same. But we will have it on a rolling basis to cover the shortfall from January. And if we get to the point in 2025 or 2026 or 2027 where we have funding from North Saanich and decent grants from the Victoria Foundation, for example, etc., we would pay it back into the SPAG fund, and that would be the end of it.
Okay.
That was our intention.
So my apologies, it was the term, when you used the term rolling previously, that I thought this was ongoing. I'm going to turn to Mr. Isick.
Yes, I think rolling is perhaps somewhat misleading. It's a one-time allocation that they would like to keep set aside until a future year when they're on solid financial footing. Then they might consider taking that 25,000 and putting it back into the arts grant program.
So we're understanding, and I think you're understanding, that if you choose to allocate that, take that $25,000 from that reserve and put it into operations now, or whether you choose to do that next year, or you do it part this year, part next year, that's not a concern to us. It's a $25,000 one-time. We're under that understanding?
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So, council, normally, or sorry, I would, given the information and clarification that's provided, I withdraw the motion, but the motion is actually on the floor. So it's council's motion, so I can't withdraw it. No, it's the same thing. The amendment is on the floor. So I would just, unless there's a further speaker, I could call the question on the amendment now. Councillor Novak.
Thank you. I'll just speak to the amendment.
Okay.
We're still talking about the amendment, correct? We
Yes.
haven't voted on the amendment.
Go ahead.
So based on the information that's been presented, I feel that the amendment is redundant. It's unnecessary. The
Sorry,
motion covers exactly what ArtSea wants to do, and adding anything to it, I think, is unnecessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? The motion is defeated. We're back to the main motion. Is there any further discussion on the main motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you again for taking the time to come forward this evening. We're now turning to number 5, which is we have one bylaw under 5A, that is bylaw number 2283, which is amendment number 4 to our business license bylaw to include short-term rentals as a business requiring a license. We've had discussion and a staff report at a previous meeting. We gave the first readings, and we have a recommendation this evening. Councillor Duck.
I'd like to move the recommendation that the bylaw be adopted.
Second.
We have it moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call all in favor. That carries unanimous. Thank you. I would look for a mover and seconder that the minutes of our November 12th meeting be adopted. Moved by Councillor Duck, seconded by Councillor O'Keefe. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? None are opposed. That motion carries. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is under 11A, and we have Councillor Duncan providing her CRD Regional Water Supply Commission report.
Yeah, thank you. So we had a number of reports come back that are basically interim reports that we'll be continuing with public feedback in the new year. So one of them is the strategic plan. The CRD Water Commission has put out to public comment the strategic plan. That's a 30-year plan. And they've done phase 1 to try to refine the messaging and get an understanding of what the public understands about the existing system and how they need to communicate what's in the plan and what they need to do. And that will be going to phase 2 will be opening up so the general public can provide comments back to the CRD through their website starting again January 25th, and that online survey will be up for 45 days. One of the other reports that came back is the Saanich Peninsula Water Commission and the CRD are looking at amalgamation, a feasibility study. And so right now we have the 2 water commissions because way back when, the Saanich Peninsula developed their own water commission first, and we had our own water supply. And then the CRD was formed later, and what's happened is that all of our infrastructure that was originally under the Saanich Peninsula is now under the CRD. The CRD operates it. They're essentially the same system. And so we are looking at whether we actually still need, the staff time and the council time and whether we might actually be a little more efficient with our cost and operations if we amalgamate, and what it would actually take to move the pots of money and transfer any of the debt servicing and things like that. And so we're going to get another report on that in the new year. So far we just kind of got a report about what would need to be looked at and what the main things are, and that is mostly about how the CRD would take on any debt the Saanich Peninsula has and some of the infrastructure that's currently under the Saanich Peninsula's purview that's not fully under the CRD's as well. We have a lot of discussions about the DCCs still, of course, and that public feedback is going on concurrently with the strategic plan. And the issue we've run into is, of course, that when people question the validity, the calculations that go into the DCCs and the costs that would be they're based on this what's in the strategic plan and needing to account for costs like a water filtration plant and other infrastructure. And so we end up kind of with this loop where people question the strategic plan, but the strategic plan is a different feedback process. And so staff are going forward with that. I know the CRD and the CRD board are in communication with stakeholders on that, and it's still an ongoing process. And the thing we spoke about now is the idea of, because of the potential costs to housing and housing affordability is such an issue, getting the staff to investigate a DCC waiver program for NGO nonprofit housing, and getting an actual evaluation of how often such a waiver might be needed, and whether that's the best way to actually lower the costs for that housing, or whether that's going to end up with further problems down the road. So again, we'll get further reports in the new year when that comes back. I think it's been more of a challenge than was initially anticipated, but at the same time it means that the public has been engaged in questioning the way the CRD is collecting information and how we're making decisions, and that's been, it's a good learning process. As a result, it means that the regional water supply will be having a lot more business to do, and the business will be moved to the afternoon instead of simply in the morning. So those who are on a council who will be attending those meetings starting in 2025 will be a new time, and with probably extended hours for the really long discussions that might end up coming up. And we've also amended the Water Advisory Commission bylaw somewhat to strengthen the process of input from the public, specifically getting First Nations representation on there. And especially as we've been discussing the Saanich Peninsula amalgamation, right now the First Nations actually have official seats on the Saanich Peninsula Water Commission. So one of the fears is if we get rid of that, they get rid of their official seats. Granted, now that when we look at the CRD, there are a lot of First Nations, and a lot of them are really, really pressed for having staff who can have time to attend these things. So making sure we have the wording that allows people to come in if their nation is going to be impacted and have a vote, but who are not actually required to be there for quorum and to participate in everything if it doesn't affect them. And really kind of a lot of discussion about the meaning of what an advisory commission does and how they can best be used to bring forward the business of commissions, which is something that comes up with lots of advisory commissions that councils have, and how best to use that input. So it was a good discussion if anybody wants to hear that. And if anyone has any questions about any of the public feedback processes, feel free.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. We appreciate the update, and thank you for making that report. Council, I'm going to ask for a consideration here. We do have next on our agenda the committee of the whole, the committee report from Committee of the Whole last week, and we will have at least one motion to consider there. We then have the Boulevard tree removal request. We then have the Victoria Airport Authority development referral with an introduction from staff, and then discussion on the 8 recommendations, the 8 comments that are provided. And then we will get to the emergency winter weather response. Given the members of the public who've taken the time to come and speak to council this evening and are waiting patiently in the chamber, I would ask for consideration that we next move, and I do see the proponent who spoke with regards to the development application and variance application under Committee of the Whole has left, that we give consideration to next considering the Boulevard tree removal, and then next considering the emergency winter weather response, and then coming back to the Committee of the Whole and the Airport Authority referral. Councillor Duff?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. So if we could, we'll now turn to item 13A, which is the Boulevard tree removal request at 10045 Judson Place. And we have a report from our Director of Engineering. I'll turn to Ms. Clary, please, for an introduction.
Good evening. As they spoke this evening, the property owner of 10045 Judson Place requested that the town-owned boulevard tree on the boulevard fronting their property be removed. The tree is a healthy maple tree, and at this point there's no reason according to our tree preservation bylaw, that the tree should be removed, which is why it's being appealed to council tonight. The tree did cause a sewer blockage late last year. The town, both the property owner and the town, addressed that. The town also installed an inspection chamber, which will make future issues like that easier to address moving forward. So there are other information that the property owner provided in their application, which is attached to this staff report, and I'm here to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you. I'll turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Seeing none, we have a recommendation. I would look to a member to move the recommendation or an alternate recommendation, please. Councillor Ethel.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move the ultimate recommendation that the request to remove the town-owned tree from the boulevard fronting 10045 Judson Place be approved.
I'll second.
We have it moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover and seconder.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think it's a challenging situation for council, and I'll also listen closely to my colleagues' comments on this, but I think certainly the presentation is compelling with respect to the anxiety this has created for the homeowner. I understand that. I appreciate that. Staff have certainly noted, the tree with respect to its health is in good condition from their reporting, but has also noted the challenges this tree's root system has created, and by nature of the inspection chamber that's been introduced, I feel gives the homeowner and the town a better opportunity to monitor this, certainly, but the ongoing damage beyond the sewer connection relates to the property at large, so to the driveway, to the town's roadway, etc. So I'm inclined to support the application that has been brought forward by the homeowner.
perhaps not germane to the motion, so please cut me off if it's not the case. I did note in the application, the homeowner had suggested that the tree be removed at the town's expense. Less sympathetic in that scenario. I think the town typically has a process and procedure around this, and I would yield to staff if there's something that needs to be visited in terms of the cost, but that is my only, I think, concern with what's been suggested here by the homeowner.
Thank you for the motivation, Councillor. I will turn to staff for a question of clarification, and that is, if the town had approved this application to remove the tree, would it have been at the owner's expense or the town's expense?
Through to the mayor, typically trees that are being requested to be removed are the person requesting them. It's at their cost to remove the tree. However, this individual specifically asked the town to cover the costs. So if that is the direction, that it would be helpful if council does approve this to get direction on whether or not, who should be paying for the removal at this time.
Thank you for the clarification, Ms. Clary. I would turn to perhaps the mover and seconder to consider an amendment clarifying the responsibility for the tree removal. Councillor Rintoul?
Sure. An amendment to the motion on the floor then, following the reference be approved, I would add at the applicant's expense.
Do we have a seconder for the amendment? Sorry, so, okay, so we don't have a mover for that, but as we've heard from staff, we need to provide clarity in this motion as to whether the town is incurring the expense or the owner is incurring the expense. Councillor O'Keefe.
Can we cover that as a motion arising?
I would suggest that it is easy to amend this motion to indicate who is taking that.
Okay, so I would make the amendment.
Actually, I'm going to allow a motion arising, and the reason being, and I'm just thinking this through out loud if I may, is that their councillors may or may not be in support of the motion that is on the floor, and based on the outcome of the floor, council members then may or may not be in favor. So there may be different decisions on the different motions. So I won't seek an amendment or suggest any amendment at this time. Thank you for that, Councillor O'Keefe. Further discussion on this motion that's on the floor. It's not amended. Sorry, Councillor O'Keefe, you did have the floor.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I'm in favor of allowing the tree removal. It's never a good thing when we have to cut down a healthy tree, but I'm sympathetic to the damage that it's causing to the homeowners' drain systems, storms, sewer, that sort of thing. It sounds like it's something that, although it's maybe kind of fixed up, they had to incur significant cost, and it's likely to happen again. And it's our tree, and it's on our property. So I feel we should take some sort of responsibility for that and allow it to come down. So I'll support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Duncan, then Councillor Garnett.
Yeah, thank you. A question for you to staff, if I may. The applicant has planted 2 trees on their property, suggesting they're, fulfilling the obligation to replace trees. Can you remind me, in our tree bylaw, do we have a stipulation about for how many years those trees have to be maintained before they count as a replacement? They're very young trees, and so I feel there's something about 3 years to make sure that they actually survive to replace it. Is that currently in there?
Ms. Clary?
Through to Councillor Duncan, yes, our tree preservation bylaw requires a deposit of $750 per replacement tree, which the town would then hold for 2 years and refund if the trees are still healthy after 2 years. Again, if the town is responsible for removing these trees, we wouldn't make this applicant go through the tree removal process because it's really a town-owned tree that the town is removing. So we wouldn't typically require them to have that deposit for replacement trees if that is the direction of council.
Okay, thank you.
So just for clarification, so should council be indicating whether replacement trees are necessary or not?
That would be helpful.
Okay, we can give consideration to that in a further motion arising if necessary. Thank you for the question. You had the floor, Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, I was waiting to see what other people would do with this one, because I did go out and I saw the tree, and it was healthy and it was not approaching the power lines, and the damage to the surface infrastructure I didn't think was actually problematic. But I do find the idea of continuing problems with the subsurface infrastructure expensive potentially for the town. In fact, it seems like it was more expensive for the town, not only to fix what this tree did to our infrastructure in the sewer and storm sewer beneath, but also then to put in the hole, the inspection hole. And so I'm actually worried that to keep this tree may cost the town more money over time than it might even cost the applicant, because of the location of the tree above our infrastructure. And then from a pure saving the town's cost perspective, this might actually be a better tree to come down. So thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, thank you, Mayor. And I just want to assure the applicant that I never make decisions like this without going to visit the tree or property. It's just who I am. So I was there Friday, and I will talk to some of the points you've made here in your application. I don't think it's too big for the property. I think you said it's grown too big, but if you go around pretty much every part of the community, this is what a boulevard tree should look like in terms of size. The hydro lines, Councillor Duncan spoke to, not really an issue. They're pretty wispy branches, easily pruned if they get close. I don't see that as an issue. The curb itself, there were already 2 cars parked there. It's not really a tripping hazard because you're not really going to walk there. So I didn't see that as a problem. That you mentioned the leaves, and as a person who had to bag 25 to 30 bags of leaves every year from a boulevard tree, I just assumed it was my civic responsibility to take the leaves out of the street to prevent clogging of gutters, and I would hope others would do the same. So that to me is never a reason to remove a tree. Leaves are just part of having a tree. What I would say is, and normally I would, I'm a staunch protector of boulevard trees because our urban forest strategy really emphasizes how important they are, because we're going to lose trees on private property due to redevelopment, especially now with new legislation. So appreciating you've planted those trees, but at some point down the line in the future, based on the shape of that lot, building footprint will require removal of those trees, no matter how big they get. And that is a concern for me, not just your property, but others. Having said that, I do have a lot of sympathy for you in terms of the way I am, I would be out of that inspection chamber every week, probably checking. It's just who I am. I got OCD. I'd be like, are the roots coming? So, and I wouldn't be able to live that way. So I understand completely the anxiety you feel about whether or not that would be an issue, and constantly having to worry about it, and having to worry about, okay, we're going to use, is the bathroom going to back up today? Like I couldn't live like that either. So I normally would vote against this motion, but when there's the safety of individuals, safety of a building, and costs and preventative measures for you as a homeowner, then I am sympathetic to that. So in one of the rare occasions for me, I will actually support the motion that's on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. Councillor Duck.
Yeah, I will be supporting this motion based on my colleagues' comments and thoughts. And I just want us to be aware that we're not setting a precedent here. There was definitely a case to be made here, and just to be sure that we don't do this on a regular basis. And as my colleague Councillor Garnett has identified, we have a distinct shortage of an urban forest canopy. So it is reluctantly that we pull any tree out of our canopy, and so I think this one is a case has been made that justifies it. So I will move to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. Seeing no further speakers, I'll call the question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And so we're now going to, sorry, we do have 1 or 2 consideration motions rising. Please, Councillor O'Keefe.
I'll start with this one, that the cost of the removal of the tree be covered by the town.
Second.
We haven't moved in seconded. Deliberation?
I guess it's our tree, it's on our property. I think and if we've made the decision to remove it, we should cover the cost for that. If I think about if my neighbor's tree, if my tree was causing grief to my neighbor, I wouldn't be telling him to, I would expect that I would have to cover the cost of that, so it seems to me it should be our responsibility to take it down if it's causing problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Novak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I simply reiterate what my colleague has said. I think it makes perfect sense that in this case, which as Councillor Duck and Councillor Garnett have stated, this is a unique case, not something that we're going to draw as a precedent for the future. But in this case, I would definitely support the town covering the costs for reasons have already been stated. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I will support the motion, but just a comment to the applicant that, you know, we're down to one arborist. We have one arborist who's been injured for a while, so it may take a while. So just don't be. We just don't know. He's very busy and he has a lot on his plate. So just be cognizant of the fact that it may take a while. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? That does carry unanimous as well. And a motion arising with regards to replacement is not necessary given the comments from staff previously. Thank you. So we'll now turn to item 14A, which is the correspondence, the letter from the City of Victoria dated November 19th regarding emergency winter weather response and planning. I would turn to our CAO, Mr. Edwards, please.
Thank you, Mayor. So Council, you would have received this letter from the Mayor of Victoria, which was directed to our mayor, and I believe directed to, it's the same letter was directed to all mayors within the region. You would have also received some other correspondence from members of the public, and one in particular from a resident of the City of Victoria. And you should have also received my response in your agenda package to that letter. And so I do want to just make a couple of points before we open it up for discussion. But I want to be really clear that the town of Sydney does have an extreme cold weather response plan in place. And I do also want to acknowledge that any plan needs to be revisited and reconsidered over time. And I would imagine that this plan is worth re-looking at. And I also want to acknowledge the great work that St. Andrew's Church provides in care and support to the underhoused of Sydney. I'm new to the town, and so I don't really know what levels of service are provided by which organizations, and so I really appreciate hearing from them tonight about the great work that they do. And so I also want to make it very clear that housing and shelter support is a service that is a provincial responsibility, but they look entirely to municipalities to actually deliver the service in partnership with predominantly non-governmental organizations and great groups such as the St. Andrew's Church. The municipality really is there in these types of initiatives to help shepherd the creation, establishment, and delivery of the service, but the municipality itself generally doesn't deliver the service. And so the City of Victoria provides a vast array of support and services to the underhoused and vulnerable populations within the City of Victoria and beyond, but that's primarily done through NGOs that they have strong partnerships with, that they've built over time, and that they have also developed a very robust partnership with the provincial government through BC Housing, who provides the funding to deliver those services. And it's those organizations, their willingness to open up their facilities and to have membership of their groups, whether they be volunteers or paid professionals, to become trained to support this level of service and to provide this level of service, that do that very important work. And the city effectively is their key partner in helping guide and shepherd that service itself. And so BC Housing Ministry, or Housing Agency, does have a pretty comprehensive list of criteria that needs to be met in order to establish such a service. And it's not something that we can just, as a municipality, turn around and initiate very quickly, especially with our limited resources that we have. The City of Victoria provides annual operating budget over $600,000 to their emergency program. Ours, by comparison, is around $34,000. And so we share the emergency response planning initiative through our chief, our fire chief, and our deputy chief and our administrator with the fire department. And we don't have that dedicated resource that some of the other municipalities have. There are some organizations in other municipalities that may step up and provide these types of emergency cold weather response shelters without that provincial funding and perhaps without even municipal funding or municipal support. But if the municipality, if the town of Sydney is being asked to step up and to take that initiative on, it's absolutely imperative that we would do that in a legal and proper way, and that would require ensuring that our partners who we would be looking to partner with have facilities that meet zoning as well as building code regulatory requirements, and that the staff are adequately trained to take on those resources. And then establishing the funding mechanisms by which the organization could be supported by the province would be critical to getting this kind of a service in place. And so while I strongly believe that it is a service that needs to be considered and it's not something that is taken lightly, I do also want to just ensure that council is well informed about the amount of resources, time and commitment that it would take to do this right, and that I would just be cautious in how we do respond to the Mayor of Victoria, and my recommendation would be that staff draft a response to the Mayor that is somewhat reflective of my comments tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. I will turn to colleagues if there are any questions. Councillor Novick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to staff. I know that this is a challenging topic, but could you provide us with a very high-level Coles Notes version of exactly what our cold weather response measures currently are?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Through the chair to your question, I might turn to our fire chief for more detailed response, but essentially our cold weather response plan is activated when the I believe it's the Victoria Airport weather station indicates a temperature that drops to -4, and that's the trigger by which the province requires and issues an alert to open up a response center. And even before that trigger would happen, I know that both the RCMP, our bylaw, and our other emergency responders will do wellness checks with the known unhoused folks in the community to see if they are okay and if they do require assistance or are seeking shelter. And if they are seeking shelter, they ensure that transportation to that shelter is not a barrier. It's not likely that the amount of underhoused people are traveling to Victoria at the rate at which it may be indicated in the media and some of the more recent comments that are circulating around. As indicated by some of the speakers earlier today, many of the underhoused and unhoused people in Sydney aren't comfortable going to Victoria and so would prefer to stay here even in inclement weather. And I'm reporting this out in second and third hand information. I don't know that firsthand. But I do want to also clarify that if if a community does establish a plan that is accepted by BC Housing, and BC Housing does provide support to that community and the organization that's providing the shelter, it is possible to develop a separate weather trigger than what the provincial trigger would be. And I know that individual municipalities are able to set their own standards in that regard. And so I'll just turn to the fire chief to see if he has anything to add.
Chief Mickelson.
Through the mayor to Councillor Novak, I feel that our CAO's comments were quite accurate. We very much do have a cold weather response plan in place, and it was drafted leveraging the Assistance to Shelter Act and the BC Extreme Weather Response Program. And it does have trigger points, and they're actually by Environment and Climate Change Canada, and then when that meets the definition of an extreme weather conditions for the Vancouver Island region, that would be the trigger points, and those are the same trigger points used by the City of Victoria. So when I built this this operational guideline or this policy, we leveraged the existing response policy in the City of Victoria, so a lot of it is pirated from them, for lack of a better term. I want to just clear up a few things that in the media it's been said that, you know, the town of Sydney is, you know, sending people to Victoria. That's patently false. It's under the Assistance to Shelter Act, the police force, the RCMP have the ability to assist or take people or provide transportation to shelter. Nobody from the town of Sydney local government is providing transportation for anyone like that, and we wouldn't be able to. It's under the Police Act and the Assistance to Shelter Act. Our program leverages the weather triggers for extreme weather and provides proactively and through messaging to go out and identify our unhoused populace and ensure that they're aware of the pending weather issue and provide them opportunities that if they do want to access shelters in Greater Victoria, that they can, and then under certain circumstances that the RCMP will transport them. In our program, as with any operational guideline, there's always a continuous kind of feedback loop for improvement and revision of the program, and part and parcel of that is annually the RCMP log their encounters with the unhoused during extreme weather events and document how many times someone unhoused refuses or actually takes up a trip to Victoria or another shelter site. And the information that I've received, it's extremely, extremely rare that someone from the town of Sydney actually accepts a ride or a bus pass or something to access a shelter under an extreme weather advisory of the City of Victoria. We provided this, our plan, to the City of Victoria long prior to this becoming a media issue, so they're well aware of our plan, and we're not contributing to overcrowding in the City of Victoria shelters. That doesn't mean that we don't have work to do and that potentially a shelter site here, it'd definitely be warranted, but we're not contributing to shelter issues and by shipping people to Victoria. That's not factual.
So thank you, Chief. You do have the floor, Councillor Novak.
Thank you, Chief, as well. So just to confirm, make sure that we're all on the same page and that we all understand exactly what our resources and limitations are. At this point in time, we do not have a warming center in the town of Sydney. Is that correct?
That is correct, and I think it's important that we differentiate. We're talking about warming centers, and then we're talking about extreme weather shelters. So I believe what people are really focusing in on now is extreme weather shelters. So when certain temperature thresholds are met, and we're using the City of Victoria Environment Canada and climate change metrics for Greater Victoria, we could use, as our CEO articulated, we could use different temperature thresholds. Those triggers are what an extreme weather shelter would open, and it would be simply for those time frames. And that would be provided, monies would be provided back, and funding's provided through BC Housing through extreme weather shelters. that's kind of under the purview of emergency management. Warming shelters and kind of other, lodging facilities for the unhoused, I can't really speak specifically to what those would be. I can only speak through that kind of narrow lens of emergency management, but that's an extreme weather shelter is triggered by temperature drops or temperature thresholds in conjunction with another weather warning is another way to trigger it. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you. I still have a couple of more questions. Is that okay?
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. It's well known that in the summertime, during extreme heat conditions, we do offer several cooling centers around town. I think the Shoal Center is one. There might be a few others I just can't think of offhand. Is it, or could it be reasonable to offer daytime warming shelters similar to the type we would offer in the summertime in extreme heat situations?
Through the chief.
Yeah, sorry, through to Mayor.
Sorry, through the Mayor to Chief.
To Councillor Novak. Assuming if that's something we want to do during the day, we would have to obviously look and investigate that, but I would reiterate that a cooling center and an extreme weather shelter are entirely two different animals altogether. So a cooling center, basically we have a standing agreement with the Shoal Center and equipment kind of pre-staged there, whether it's air conditioners, bottled water, signs and the like, and then we initiate a messaging campaign when we again reach certain heat thresholds, and staff at the Shoal Center basically just on a monitoring basis, they just, there's no staff requirement per se. It's just a cool place. They basically have one person there that can provide some information and some tips to kind of beat the heat and the like. In respect to a warming center, there's if you're going to have funds provided and meet the thresholds, there's 2 staff minimums, there's first aid, there's specific training, there's different liability coverages. There's a number of other things to meet that extreme weather threshold. So it's not that it can't be done. We throw enough money at anything, we can do it. But again, the analogy between one and the other and our ability to pull it off is distinctly different.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Novak. I do have a follow-up question on the last question from Councillor Novak. So, through myself to the chief or to staff, we understand there's a difference between warming shelters or extreme weather shelters and cooling shelters. The cooling shelter, based on the heat dome of a couple of years ago, we established, along with a lot of other municipalities in our emergency plan, a plan with specific temperatures for opening our cooling centers, and they are only daytime cooling centers.
That's correct. They're only they're daytime cooling centers. Again, we found the only requirement is we could extend the hours. We've had that flexibility, but based on our experience, we've only had them open, and basically our cooling centers mimic a lot of the other cooling centers in the province, and I don't know of any that really stay open past 10 p.m. I assume if we had a severe enough event, we could, in theory, keep it open, but again, that's part of the different natures. During the day is when the worst of the heat occurs. Conversely, with an extreme weather shelter, it's at night. Hence, a lot of the different requirements and costs and requirements.
Thank you. And so, just for further clarification, so it does not require provincial government approval for a cooling center. That is within the municipality's emergency response plan.
That is not entirely accurate. When we have an emergency response heat plan, an emergency response cold weather plan, when a heat dome, or again when the heat plan reaches the threshold for a warning or opening a cooling center, we provide an EAF, or an expense authorization form, to Emergency Management British Columbia, stating we would like to open up a cooling center based on this criteria. Here's our plan, and we would like the these costs reimbursed for that. Now, it may be one firefighter for wages if we can't get somebody from Beacon Community Services. It may be to restock our water, or perhaps purchase a new air conditioner if one's failed or something like that. So that is funded through the province as well.
So thank you for that clarification. So appreciating that there is provincial support for cooling centers in certain circumstances.
Correct.
The cooling center itself doesn't require a provincial approval,
No, it does not.
but an emergency cold weather response or extreme weather response does require BC Housing's approval.
That is correct, as our CAO articulated. It's a community partnership with NGOs, as well as typically faith-based organizations and municipalities assisting, that provide a plan to BC Housing that's approved, and then they move forward, and they only move forward once the various municipal government requirements are met, whether that's bylaws, fire regulations, BC building regulations. Again, it's because people are sleeping in the building. The fire code and the building code come into effect to a much greater level.
And BC Housing or the ministry's requirements for shelters also require, I think was referenced by Mr. Edwards, does require a certain level of support. We appreciate certain challenges that unhoused people are facing, and so those supports, adequate supports, are required and typically provided by NGOs.
That is my experience. When you look at the majority of support networks in Greater Victoria, whether it's Our Place or the Salvation Army or some of these larger Beacon Community Services, I believe has a facility in Victoria. These are the type of established and larger organizations that run these facilities.
Thank you. I'll turn to colleagues if there are further questions. Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, it sounds that the limitation really is the staffing for these overnight, and probably there's other things that hoops we'd need to jump through, but those are likely lesser ones for our municipality, and it's really just that there's always shortages of properly trained workers, really, from NGOs and government organizations. Are you aware, I'm just trying to think of what we respond here about what the next steps are, is what the training is. Is this something that the province mandates, this must be somebody who is a trained social worker with degrees and such, who would have, the kind of person who has to be able to work at certain facilities? Or is this something that the NGOs train volunteers to do? I know Our Place has quite a lot of volunteer staff. Like, what's the next step regarding how we would be able to actually bring local NGOs or local people here who would be willing to partner with these organizations or be trained by these organizations into the loop?
Well, through the mayor to Councillor Duncan, that's an excellent question. I don't believe a degree in social work or anything is required, although I do believe some basic understanding of recognizing violence prevention as well as first aid and a few other things are requirements. I think probably our best kind of analogous way we could look at something is, I know there's the Souk Shelter Society, which again is more of a comparable facility with a smaller shelter space. I believe they have approximately 5 extreme weather shelter beds. They would probably be our best opportunity to look at something on a smaller and more feasible scale versus what's going on in the city of Victoria that has massive or relatively massive budgets, and what are purpose-built facilities or renovated facilities. So if we were moving forward, that would probably be my recommendation, is to look at what that society has. I understand it was founded in 2017 and was officially incorporated as a nonprofit in 2018. So I think that would be probably our first step, is to look at what it has taken to get off the ground in Souk. Would probably be our best bet.
Okay, thank you. Salt Spring comes to mind as well.
Yeah, sure. Mr. Edwards. Microphone, please.
Yeah. Just adding to what the fire chief provided just now. I think one of the biggest hurdles too is to identify an partnering organization that's willing to take the lead on this, as well as provide the facility space, and that space meeting code requirements. And if we were able to have that, partnering organization come forward, and then perhaps the staffing would follow. But there's a lot of unanswered questions that would need to be explored. I know the requirements that BC Housing has in place for approving plans is pretty extensive, and it includes like communication plans and media response plans and many other specifics. And so again, while I don't want to come across as being obstructionist, I want to just make sure that council is completely aware of the staff time and resources to action this is significant.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan, you have the floor.
No, thank you. No further.
Thank you. Councillor Duct and Councillor O'Keefe.
Yes, if I may, through you, Mayor, to staff. To be clear, the City of Victoria does or does not operate emergency warming centers?
Periodically, I understand they will open what I believe are municipally owned community centers for extreme events, but the bulk of the shelter spaces are provided through NGOs.
So on the ongoing basis, extreme aside, ongoing provision of services is through NGOs, not the City of Victoria.
Correct.
So relative to the mayor's letter, Mayor Alto's letter, is she asking for those critical situations for a warming center, or is it in general just a warming center, non-extreme, non-critical?
I can't presume to know the specifics of Mayor Alto's request, but it is with certainty that the bulk of the shelter spaces in the City of Victoria are provided through partnership arrangements.
Right. So the request from Mayor Alto is for an extreme warming center, not necessarily operated by the municipality, but operated in the jurisdiction of that municipality.
That might be the request.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe. Microphone. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Please.
A question through you back to our CAO. So when you're talking about those very elaborate requirements from BC Housing, and I went and I looked it through their application, I thought, holy smokes, this is a lot of stuff, a plan for this, a plan for that, and so that would be required if we wanted to have funding, if the funding, I guess, was significant. If we were able to do something that didn't require so much funding, if there was an existing building, a group that could step up, would that minimize costs, or are you still leaning towards going with the BC Housing model just because it's more comprehensive and covers probably off all things we would need to do?
Well, currently staff are not exploring options. It's not a direction that's been provided by council to staff. It's not part of the council's strategic plan, and so it's not actually something that we are exploring. But there's nothing stopping an organization from opening their doors and providing a warming space or a shelter, so long as they do meet the zoning and code requirements. And so we don't know with certainty as to what each faith-based organization structural or building configurations are as to whether or not they would meet those code requirements. So if an organization wanted to take that leadership and to provide that service, we would be happy to come and complete an inspection of their facility to ensure that they met those requirements. It may not be a high bar to pass, but that is a totally legitimate thing that another organization can provide.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
A question I have for clarification is, would an emergency warming center for the unhoused be operated 24 hours if the weather conditions were such?
That's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Keefe?
Sorry, just clarification. I'm kind of going back and forth between emergency weather shelter and warming center. So you're saying warming center could potentially be 24 hours. Under the emergency weather shelter, is that different? I'm still kind of struggling with the differences between the two.
Actually, I'll try to assist. Is there a
Okay.
distinction between an emergency warming center? Does that require BC housing approval, and an emergency shelter? An emergency weather shelter?
Where the BC housing requirements come into play is whether you're seeking provincial funding and support for that service. And my understanding is that emergency warming center is stood up for a short duration that typically is not overnight. But if you're providing the shelter space, then that is provision for overnight shelter. Does that answer your question?
So
I'll turn to the chief as well.
So the emergency weather shelter would be overnight, but warming center would just be something during the day. Or are they both kind of the same thing?
They are, and again, I can't
Okay.
speak specifically to a warming center. I believe the request from Mayor Alto was more specific to an extreme weather response.
Right.
And looking at, in extreme weather response, the program from the province funds community-based services to provide extra emergency shelter spaces during periods of extreme winter weather. And again, that would be based on set temperature thresholds that threatens the health and safety of individuals who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness. So, and that would stay in place as long as the weather warning remained in effect. So it could remain in effect for 12 hours or 24 days, as long as it stayed that cold or the threshold stayed, that extreme weather shelter would remain in place and be funded by the province.
Okay.
Mr. Edwards?
And just coming back to an earlier question, I have worked and lived in other communities where non-governmental organizations, typically faith-based organizations, would stand up this type of service with no support or funding in place from others. So it is entirely possible to provide this service without that provincial funding and support. But if that provincial funding and support is needed to offer the service, then you have to go through this BC Housing pre-approval process.
So just for clarity, so if funding is not sought by the NGO to do it, they don't have to get approval to operate from BC Housing?
That's my understanding, and perhaps the communities that I lived and worked in previously were doing it very much under the radar. But with certainty, we as a municipality would want to make sure that that facility met code requirements for providing that shelter space. But I don't see that if the facility was satisfactory, that the province would be restrictive on the service being provided.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff, just sort of building on that. And if your assumptions and what you experienced before were true, and organizations could open a shelter and could do it without provincial funding, would that preclude the municipality from offering any kind of funding to support them?
Yes, in that scenario, the municipality wouldn't be required to, but could provide funding support as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So council, not seeing further questions, if we could give direction back to staff with regards to a response to the City of Victoria or other direction. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'll try this. That staff bring to council options to set up and I'll look for staff for clarity on this. I was going to say emergency warming center, so I'll go with that in Sydney. So that staff bring to council options to set up an emergency warming shelter in Sydney.
Sorry, did you want any direction from staff on that wording, or before I look for a seconder?
Yeah, so I guess, so what I'm trying to articulate is that there would be, whether it's a warming center or an emergency weather center, where if the temperature drops below a certain temperature, whether it's in the daytime or the nighttime, that people have a place to go.
So through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, if it's specific for an extreme weather event, I think the proper terminology would be an extreme weather response shelter.
Okay.
I think that would be the most appropriate term.
Okay, so I'll say that. So
Ms. Nelson, could you read it back as it was read, or with the new wording? Yes, please.
That staff bring back to council option to set up an extreme weather response shelter in Sydney.
Thank you. That's your intent, Councillor. I would look for a seconder.
Yeah, thank you.
Second.
Sorry, moved by, seconded by Councillor Duncan. I'll turn to the mover and seconder.
Thank you. So just to clarify, I think we've kind of clarified what we're looking for. And I guess we had some correspondence on this and concerns from people about, flocks of people coming out here. I see that this is something that I think our local population is maybe 10 to 12 people. Some of those wouldn't take advantage, so I don't see it being a big thing. Staff have outlined very well that this is a complicated thing to do, right? It takes a lot of, as I say, when I looked at the plan for BC Housing, finding an appropriate facility, as I said, finding people to set it up, people to run it, that sort of thing, it's complicated. And St. Andrews made a try last year to do something. That didn't work out. And I think actually something the CAO mentioned that kind of resonated with me is the role of municipalities in not necessarily operating it, but shepherding. I see our role, what I would look for here is for us to take that leadership role to look at what the resources are in the community. Talk to St. Andrews. I don't know who else might be out there that might be able to provide support. Beacon Community Services, whether there's capacity with, I don't know, Salvation Army or other places that are willing to set up satellite organizations. So that's kind of what I'm looking for us to do. In regards to, I just don't feel comfortable that going with what we've done in the past is acceptable. And yes, it's true that people haven't necessarily accepted the offers to go into shelter, but from what I've understood from our friends at St. Andrews, there's a number of reasons why people don't want to go downtown. They don't feel safe there. you know, just carting all their belongings all the way downtown on the bus is an issue. Also, they do have supports out there. They have built a community. You know, I've spent the last couple weeks spending time at St. Andrews, and they've been good enough to introduce me to some of these folks and to learn what they're doing there. And they really all, it's quite a really neat community. They look out for each other, they support each other, they know where they can go to get meals. I think some of the speakers today outlined some of the other supports that they get from St. Andrews. So I think, like I say, it's complicated. And I know our staff are very busy with other projects. They have their own staffing challenges. So it may be that even doing the research on this and identifying potential stakeholders and putting a plan together is going to be challenging. And if that means that council may have to reprioritize or put things off, I'm personally okay with that. I think that, you know, we do a lot of good things in the community, lots of money out there to go to different organizations. And I think that, you know, this is a group of people who are the most vulnerable in our community, and they are part of our community. They've been around for years, and they need our help, and they need us to step up. And so I think we need to do that, and if we need to make adjustments to make that happen, I'm in favor of doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to the seconder, Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. We know that staff always have many priorities. I know being on council for 6 years sometimes feels like longer, and we have had, I think, a housing, you know, emergency situation, affordable housing crisis that whole time, and many of us ran specifically because that was becoming an issue. And then for the past 4 years, it's been the economic and social fallout from COVID and the response to that. And I don't think we're anywhere near out of the woods on either of those things. So I see this as something, we know that this is going to come up for staff, and that staff time is going to be directed to this. Whether or not we plan for it or not, it's going to keep coming back. And so I think this is council's direction to staff to say, we know as we're going into budget season, and we know as we're going into, you know, our strategic planning and looking at what we've done so far and the projects we have on a go, that this has really been one, having Mariah call in and say, you know, even from her door knocking for the community association, that she was surprised that this was really on people's radar. And so I think this is something that we can kind of give staff the leeway to say, this is something that's now a priority in the community. And if that means that priorities are getting shuffled, we're council's aware of that, the community is aware of that, and they're okay with that, and we'd like to go forward with that to the best of staff's ability, investigating where we move on from here. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Gurnett.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'd like to thank the people that came to speak tonight and for your work and advocacy on behalf of these people in our community. It's very much appreciated. I see you out there all the time when I'm doing my walk, so appreciate the work you do. It never ceases to amaze me how we can, and I understand why there's protocols in place and why we have these parameters set up. It never ceases to amaze me how we complicate and make things complex when it's just down to the bare bones. We're helping the most vulnerable in our community, and we make it to be something so challenging, and that's sad. I think it's a sad statement of our society in general. But my hope is, I thank Councillor Key for bringing this forward. My hope is that we can come to some kind of path forward, and I am very appreciative of staff's time and the work they put in on so many different priorities in our community. And this should be a priority. Should be a priority for all of us. And so I'm hopeful that somehow we can find a path that the CAO spoke to, where we can maybe work with some of our local organizations and work alongside them, help them through funding or whatever means possible to provide some much needed housing for people at a time when they critically need it. this kind of thing in a country of this wealth shouldn't be happening, but it does. So I do think we need to move forward with something at this time. I think it's been on the burner for a while, and I think now seems to be the time we need to do something. So I'll support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Councillor Duck.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just want to be clear to my colleagues, we need to be very careful here. We're asking staff to look at specifically an emergency winter weather shelter. There's criteria which both the CAO and the chief have identified that have to be reached for before something like this is implemented. That doesn't cover the gap between what exists now and when that temperature protocol is reached and turned. So, you know, we heard from the folks that spoke tonight and the letters that were written in that we need to address that gap as well. And I think that's part of the challenge is that Mayor Alto has given a direction to the higher end of that, which is what happens in an emergency, and they provide those services, and she's looking to other municipalities to provide similar services at that criteria. But in between that, we have people that are upwards of a dozen people in Sydney, if not twice that number, if they're not living under a tent or a tree or in their car, that we have to look after them in that gap. And we heard from the folks from St. Andrews today as to how do we look after that? And we're not equipped to do that as a municipality. We don't have the funding for that. We need common groups, St. Andrews, Beacon Community Services to come together to say, how do we provide those services? Equally, the municipality has to look at how do we help those that are unhoused shelter in place in our community. Recently, we put together a parks bylaw that was to give direction to how our bylaw officers and the police took care of people in park shelters, doorways, and that sort of thing. And I think we have to relook at that to see how we give more latitude to those that are not causing any impact on our society or our community to have shelter in place, whether it be in an alcove at a park and on a deck somewhere. And that's the gap I'm talking about that we're not working on right now. What our motion is looking at is that critical emergency drop in temperature where we have to find shelter for people. And that's what Mayor Alto is asking us to do, or to give consideration to do. There are two questions there. One is, how do we take care of the people and shelter them in place in our community right now? And how do we take care of the people when it's now, as the chief said, -4 degrees and we need to create some sort of shelter locally? So just as we look at this question, to be careful how we address the motion on the floor as well as the gap that we're not covering. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Duck. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. And like my colleagues, I'll thank the members of the congregation at St. Andrews for their contribution to assisting unhoused in our community. I heard a reference from one of my colleagues that, you know, St. Andrews had made efforts to, I think, establish a service of this nature, which, you know, didn't proceed in the manner in which had been intended, and that reminds me, and I recollect presentations and efforts to move forward in that direction, and it certainly reminds me that it's a challenging issue to address. And forgive my perspective for perhaps being slightly different from some of my colleagues, but I want to speak on behalf of perhaps some residents who weren't here this evening and maybe not as well informed that we'd be discussing the City of Victoria's request of its neighboring municipalities this evening. Some municipalities, I think, have very well-intentioned moved forward and taken on initiatives that, for compassionate reasons, for other reasons, have looked to take on responsibilities that we've heard this evening are by and large provincial responsibilities. And so leading and making those connections with the province, you know, may well be a next step to move forward some sort of solution locally on the peninsula and elsewhere. But what I heard this evening was that, and I hope I'm not getting into a debate with my colleagues on this, I'm hoping I'm speaking to the motion, and that someone's not gonna feel compelled to take this point by point, but I just want to raise it. That Sydney has, we've heard this evening, we have an extreme weather response plan. My takeaway from the discussion is it's not oversubscribed. We've heard from our staff sergeant, the detachment commander, as recently as earlier this month, with respect to their outlook, their outreach efforts. We've heard from staff with respect to what that looks like through BYLAWS or through first responders. We've heard from community Samaritans, be it through St. Andrews or elsewhere, the type of outreach that occurs. I don't know. Anecdotally, and I don't recollect the exact takeaway from when the staff sergeant was last here, but I recollect a municipality and the CRD, making efforts to, move unhoused populations away from certain areas where they were encamped, and the effect it may have had on other communities as those unhoused individuals were relocated. And if I just think there's a valid argument, or at least a realization we should accept or understand, that the less transient unhoused community that's here, I think is here, as I heard, because they feel safer. I get that. It's that type of community. The lens for me, part of the lens at which I look through this, is keeping our community safe for everyone. Obviously our residents, our business community. And I'm concerned that the dialogue we're having this evening, is somewhat less representative of, some other positions that may be out there in our community. And while I respect the City of Victoria, looking to its neighboring municipalities to have this dialogue, we receive similar requests, often, and it's worthy of certainly having a discussion of this nature. But we heard from the CEO what we're doing, and I feel like a first step is, responding to the City of Victoria and letting them know what the town of Sydney is doing. Whether or not I feel inclined to support staff initiative to pursue the particular motion that's before us, I will acknowledge I'm less inclined to do so, by and large, because we've heard what the town's procedures are and response plan is currently, and I'm not hearing them from staff or the RCMP that it's oversubscribed. So I'll leave my comments there.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. Having heard from all colleagues, I'll offer the following comments. There is compassion from your elected representatives for those in our community. It is no easier for us than it is any other residents in the community to go at home at night to our homes knowing that there are unhoused in our community. We have come to know, all of us, whether members of the public in the gallery or elsewhere, or members of council, have met unhoused individuals, got to know unhoused individuals, and we're very much appreciative of the work that St. Andrews volunteers are doing for those in our community. The few thousands of dollars that we provide to you and to another faith-based organization to do the good work that you're doing is important, but it is small in a certain sense because these individuals remain unhoused. We were fortunate. When first elected in this role in 2018, the CAO and I met with all of the nonprofit housing organizations, with the provincial government, the federal government, the school board in terms of the field they have beside Sydney Elementary. We met with what we considered to be all potential options in terms of what we could provide. And quite frankly, given the land values for private property and the unavailability of vacant land in our community, external, either senior levels of government, we have failed in we've been denied in grant applications to provincial and federal government for housing initiatives. It wasn't until last year that through the efforts of Central Saanich over a couple of years that there's the supportive housing facility called the Aurora in Central Saanich. And I can tell you that 5 of the unhoused individuals that many of us have seen in our community, do have homes in that supportive housing unit. They still choose to spend their time in our community because they've become attached to our community. They've become attached, and residents have made emotional connections to those individuals. So we're appreciative of the circumstances, and we want to do more. I don't know that this was public knowledge at the time, but during the pandemic, there was a concern from the province, from the health ministry, with regards to the unhoused and the implications of a pandemic spreading within the unhoused populations. And so funding was made available, and efforts were made available, and the town of Sydney, Island Health, BC Housing, and I'm sure there was one or two other agencies, worked together for many, many weeks. And there was actually one of the motel accommodations actually provided a group of rooms that could have been available for an extended period of time. And all of these agencies, Island Health, BC Housing, all the town of Sydney, our emergency planning staff, could not find a support organization. We know that individuals have mental health and addictions challenges. We know that there are, could be associated with challenges associated with violence. And so the supports that are required to provide either basic sheltering every day to individuals or sheltering in an extreme weather situation are significant. It is not the same. Parallels have been drawn to a warming center, where we open the Shoal Center for 10 or 12 hours in a day, and individuals can get out of their hot apartments where they don't have, air conditioning and so on. It's not a parallel situation to the homeless with the challenges that they are facing, to go into an emergency shelter that, if the forecast is for -5 for 4 days, well, that facility that's providing that is going to have to be available, for that. And where does the funding come from? Yes, BC Housing has provided that funding. Most of the supports have come to be placed in Victoria, the larger organizations providing the substantial support services that go along with supportive housing, the food programs, the other addiction support programs, and so on, and sort of thing. So in passing this motion, giving this direction to staff, we are aware of what the challenges are and what the work of staff are. Staff would have to, in exploring options, well, what are the options for a location? What are the options for an NGO to actually operate it and to have provide the necessary supports for the unhoused population? The funding. Well, the funding is something that we can perhaps address through our own budgeting or through the BC Housing, grant fundings. But those first two challenges, in terms of the location and in terms of the NGO organization, we made a very significant. We talked to the organizations that were either on the peninsula or could have come to the peninsula, and that wasn't available. SUC has been very fortunate to have an organization form and provide that support, which they did during the pre-pandemic, did during the pandemic, and continued to do today, for a relatively small unhoused population, similar to Sydney's relatively low unhoused population. I'm not meaning to diminish the circumstances for these individuals by saying it's a lower population compared to other locations. So the challenge is that we do have significant projects underway, and a lot of them are for the very basic services that we provide in this community, and that residents expect every day. And so, are we expecting staff to be able to find a solution, to be able to find a location, to be able to find an NGO? That's going to take significant staff resource. It will take staff resource because our emergency management professionals within the fire department and other staff have the expertise to be able to do that. And they're out there making, over 1,000 calls a year, 1,200 calls a year to emergency response. So we expect the everyday services from our emergency responders and that sort of thing, but those would be the individuals that would have to be pursuing the options for us to consider. So I have some concern that while we do have an emergency program in place, it might not be everything that we would want to be, given the unhoused individuals in our community today. I want to speak to them of them as persons. That we're facing a significant challenge. And my preference at this stage would be to respond to the mayor with all due respect to what we have underway, the efforts that we've, perhaps reference to efforts we've undertaken in the past, and that we are not dismissing this. We will continue to consider how we can better address this challenge in our community. We have strategic planning sessions every year, and we have one coming up in the following 6 to 8 weeks. And we can give consideration to that, and we can hear from staff in terms of priorities and that sort of thing. This is a very open-ended resolution that is on the floor for staff to come back to work, and to do a level of work and come back with regards to options, and I'm not sure what the outcome of that would be, or if it's going to be, to satisfy council. So while I appreciate everything that has been said this evening, and particularly to the individuals from St. Andrews, to the individuals who wrote letters of correspondence to us, who were as passionate as all of us here tonight on this matter, that we consider providing a response. So I'm not sure that I will be supportive of the recommendation that's on the floor, but that is not to say I'm not supportive of seeing our town move forward to try to adjust this challenge. I'll leave my comments there. We've all spoken for a first time. I'll leave it to, or I'll turn to any second-time speakers. Councillor O'Keefe, please.
Thanks. So just to address a couple things. So yes, it's true that we do have an extreme weather response plan in paper. We have that. And the plan is
Point
that,
of order. So I beg your pardon.
Sorry, I'm going to acknowledge a point of order.
Okay.
Go ahead, Councillor O'Keefe.
And maybe this is a clarification for me and everyone else understands this, but Councillor O'Keefe can speak to the motion that's on the floor. Can she speak to points to try and clarify what other people have said? My concern is that we're about to hear responses to some points that were made by a councillor opening the door for rebuttal, and it's never been clear to me when we're going through this process, but my understanding is, Councillor O'Keefe, the speaker should be speaking to the motion and not what someone else has said directly.
Thank you. I'll speak to your point of order, Councillor, and say that council members, in accordance with our council procedures by law, can speak twice to an individual matter. When they are speaking for a second time, the intention is to speak to either new items, to speak to something that they have said that they wish to clarify. It is not to rebut the views expressed by colleagues on council. So I hope that provides clarification to the point of order, and I would turn the floor back to Councillor O'Keefe. And sorry, I just want to make one fair clarification. Your first remarks indicated that we have an emergency response plan on paper. We have an emergency plan in effect, in operation. Councillor O'Keefe, you have the floor.
yeah, and that was sort of my intent. And I guess, so not to rebut fellow councillors' comments, but just to go back to clarify a point I made, and maybe it wasn't clear enough, that I understand that although there is I stated that we do have a response plan in place, what I hear from people who work with our local unhoused folks, they're not interested in going downtown, and it's not, and that's why it's there's not a lot of take up on it. That's why it's unsubscribed, so to speak, is because there's those concerns about that. In terms of keeping our community safe for everyone, sorry, I absolutely agree. And I think the people that we're looking at that are unhoused, they're in our community already. People see them in the businesses of doorways and in different places around town. I think that the community, all members of the community would feel safer if these folks had a place where they could to get out of the elements and feel safe. And I think that one of my colleagues brought up a good point about addressing the gap, that the intention of this is for emergency situations, and there is a need for more comprehensive resources for people. I agree with that. I see this as at least a start in that direction. Yes, we could leave it. We could respond to the mayor perhaps stating that we will continue to work on this. You know, we knew this was an issue, you know, last winter, so.
Councillor Ethel?
I mean, you can't state that we could perhaps respond to the mayor's statement and then proceed to respond to it. You're either speaking to the motion or you're speaking to someone else's comments.
Okay, so
Okay,
we
so
have a
I'll,
motion on the floor. Sorry, I'm going to clarify. We have a motion on the floor that does not include a response to the mayor of Victoria and the request that they made. So I'll just provide
Okay.
that clarification, and so I will sustain Councillor Rintoul's point of order in that making remarks as to whether we may or not respond to the mayor should be, we shouldn't speak in that fashion.
Right,
We should
sure.
actually make a determination whether we will or won't respond.
Yeah,
And we
okay.
can do that in a motion arising if we wish.
Yeah,
So
sure.
speaking to the motion on the floor, please.
Yeah, and yeah, I think that covers it for me, thanks.
Thanks, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Novak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is my first time speaking to this. I've been listening with great interest to my colleagues. I have no less empathy for the unhoused in our community than anybody else. I support Mayor Alto's initiative to try and ensure that there is an emergency extreme weather response plan in every municipality. And I do believe it has been stated, and we do have such a plan in this municipality. So I think we're halfway there. I have some concerns about the motion as it presently stands. I think it's too open-ended. It talks about setting up a response plan, doesn't talk about operating this response plan over a period of time. I think it places an undue hardship on the staff without enough terms of reference to actually give them some meat to dig into. It's kind of a pie in the sky kind of motion from my perspective. I would much prefer, if this motion does not succeed, to see this referred to strategic planning for a more intensive review, and perhaps at that point staff could come up with some ideas that can be tossed around in an open forum and come up with something a little bit more concrete, a little bit more prescriptive. So for those reasons, and I don't want to take up too much time because we've spent a lot of time on this already, but for those reasons I'm afraid I'm going to vote against this motion. I don't believe it serves the purpose that was intended. At this stage, I think this needs to be something that we discuss as a group in a strategic planning session. It's not something that we just throw back to the staff and say, well, come up with something better than we already have. I don't think that's appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Novak. Are there any, Councillor Gurnett for a second time?
Thank you, Mayor. I would just simply state that I think it does bear further work, if you will, because from my perspective, the plan we have is not serving the people in our community at this point in time. So, thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Novak is opposed. Councillor Rintoul and myself, the motion carries. Council, I would consider that we should provide a response to the mayor. I would suggest that without a motion, the CAO and myself will craft a response to provide a response to the Mayor of Victoria based on the motion that was passed this evening.
So moved.
It's moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Clarification, what was just moved?
What the mayor
That we
proposed.
provide a response to the Mayor of Victoria, given the direction council has given to staff.
That the mayor and CEO craft response. Okay, thank you.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That motion carries. Thank you. Thank you again for coming this evening.
Point of order.
I'm going to call a recess now for 5 minutes until 8:50. Well said. Well said. You kicked it off. Good night, David. Boys and girls. Okay, council, we'll reconvene now. And going back to our agenda, we're now back at item 12, committee reports, and under item 12A, we are receiving the minutes of our committee of the whole meeting from November 18th. They are received on our agenda. Is there any correction to those minutes? Seeing none, we don't require a motion. I'll next turn to Councillor Duncan, who is chair of our committee of the whole meeting last week, to take us through the first recommendation, or the recommendation. I will provide some direction that while we have had remarks from the proponent during public participation this evening, we should proceed with the recommendation that council provided, and then we could look to a motion arising giving direction to the applicant with regards to their open application. So I will turn to Councillor Duncan, please.
Okay, duly noted. With the knowledge that we'll have a different motion arising, I move, or committee recommends, and I so move, that the referral of development permit application number DP 100847 and development variance permit application number DV 100359 for 2114 Beacon Avenue West to the Advisory Planning Commission be denied.
Second.
We have it moved in second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor O'Toole is opposed. Councillor Garnett is opposed. The motion carries. I'll turn back to, well, sorry, I'll leave it to any councillor with, any council member with regards to a motion arising. I think from what we've heard this evening with regards to the applicant being willing to carry, or to review the application and submission to reconsider the parking variance, council could pass a motion, or could put a motion arising on the floor requesting the applicant reconsider the parking variance within the application, and if there was anything else that council wanted to include in that motion. But given the applicant spoke to parking variance, we could give that direction in the motion to the applicant. I'll just comment that it is an open application, and so the direction that council provides is either to give direction for the applicant to bring back a revised application, or to deny the variance application, which would close the application and then the applicant, if they wanted to come back, would have to reapply. So that is why, I'll leave my comments there. Councillor Duncan.
I guess just a question. So, if the applicant was to revise their application, just for the parking, say, because that was what he indicated, that they're looking at that, could we refer that revised application to Advisory Planning Commission without coming directly to council? We did have 2 councillors who were willing to send it as it was, just to hear what they'd say. If they have a revised application, can it go to Advisory Planning without the additional step of coming back to us and then being referred back to Advisory Planning?
I will turn to staff, please. Ms. Verhagen.
Thank you. Through the mayor, it would be at the discretion of council whether you would like to see a revised application come back to committee of the whole or council before it goes to APC. Council just made a resolution to not send this to APC. So if council wanted to make a resolution for what to do with a revised application when one comes in, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just want to remind my previous remarks that the applicant spoke to the parking variance. Council members of committee, at committee of the whole last week, spoke to different aspects of the application. And so if there's anything other than the parking variance that council member wishes to have the applicant consider, then that should be included in the motion. It shouldn't just be an open-ended application or open-ended motion to say, tell the applicant, please review your application or bring back a different application. Councillor Rintoul?
Yeah, point of clarification, if I may. The suggestion that the motion may need to be more fulsome than bring back the application leads me to question then that we run the risk of trying to have a very detailed motion this evening when the applicant would have access to the video of the previous meeting and was in attendance, and I would assume have the theme of the feedback. So I'm just curious if that's advisable to try and put forward a detailed motion, and I feel like the value in having it come back to committee of the whole versus APC is that committee of the whole gets a chance to vet it, make some recommendations perhaps before it goes to APC in addition to sending it to APC. So I wonder if
okay, so I'm going to turn I'll turn to Ms. Verhagen, and I may have a comment. Ms. Verhagen?
Sure, thank you. Through the mayor, if council was to not make any subsequent motion, I mean, the applicant already indicated this evening to council that he is redesigning. So our default process as staff would be to submit a staff report to committee of the whole with the revised proposal when it comes in. That would be our next step if no other resolution is made tonight. So if council doesn't want that to happen or wants to give more clear direction on what type of revisions you would like to see, then a resolution to that effect would be helpful. If not, it would come back to committee of the whole eventually when the applicant is ready. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Verhagen. So that's helpful. So we are aware as council, we've passed a motion with regards to the motion we made. And so if the applicant has said they're bringing back an application, we do not need to pass a motion arising this evening. We can if we wish, we wish to give specific direction. Councillor Duck.
Yeah, I think we just let it go, and as Councillor Rintoul's indicated, that the applicant go back and listen to and there are other things in that meeting that they can take a note on. If they only choose to bring back a parking variance, that's up to them. As you've indicated, Mayor, the application is still active, so it's up to the applicant to move it forward.
Okay, so thank you, Councillor Duck. So I'll turn to colleagues. Does anyone wish to bring a motion arising? Seeing none, that item is completed on the agenda. And we'll move next to item 13B under staff reports, the Victoria Airport Authority Development Referral for Titan Boats at 2035 Beacon Avenue West. We have a report from the Director of Development Services. I'll turn to Ms. Verhagen, please.
Thank you. Through the mayor, as was indicated, this is a referral from the Victoria Airport Authority for changes to the existing Titan Boats facility on Beacon Avenue West at 2035 Beacon Ave West. This is just to the southwest of the new roundabout that was constructed recently at Beacon West and Gallaran. The first page of the report outlines the standard process that the VAA and the town follow for reviewing development applications on Victoria Airport Authority lands. They receive the permit application, they review it, they being the VAA, they send a referral package to the town planning staff review it, and send a report to council to review it against. Let's see, we identify any possible impacts on municipal infrastructure, provide comments to the compatibility of the proposed development on the surrounding community, and provide other comments and suggestions as appropriate. So then, council reviews, provides a recommendation or comments back to the VAA, and the airport authority is the issuer of a development permit and a lease in this case. Development permits and building permits are not issued by the town for properties on VAA lands. We just make comments on their referral that is sent over. So as was indicated, this is in addition to the existing building and also the construction of a new building within their existing lease parcel. They would be expanding their parking area slightly to the south, so pushing that fence south towards the runway to allow more space for the parking spaces that are getting displaced to make room for the new building. A few points are raised in there in terms of areas where they could better meet the VAA guidelines. Developments on VAA lands don't have to comply to Town of Sydney requirements in our zoning bylaw or our design guidelines at all, but we've provided commentary about how they do conform. Yeah, happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. I'll turn to colleagues if there's any questions. Councillor Gurnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to staff, I just have one question. Under the recommendation and the comments for consideration, number 1 and 2. So I'm assuming that staff, with those comments, don't have any concerns about any possible ecological or environmental impacts, and that they would be mitigated through, hopefully, these comments that were provided.
Thank you. Yes, the consultant that works for the VAA that reviews development applications would ensure that they're meeting all code requirements in terms of outflow from the site and meeting all requirements in that way. The requirement there, or not requirement, but the comment back about that the proposal includes a spray application booth or area and paint mixing room, that comes from our fire department's review of their existing buildings on the site, and in terms of the business activities that are taking place, they would need to add those just to improve safety on the site. And that's comments that have already gone back to their lease applicant through the VAA. So those are, we understand those are already in the works.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further discussion, we do have a staff recommendation. Councillor Duff?
And would you like the whole recommendation read out?
Yes, please.
Okay. The recommendation is, and I so move, that council direct staff to reply to the Victoria Airport Authority with a statement of no significant concerns regarding the development referral for the property at 2035 Beacon Avenue West, Titan Boats, with the following comments for consideration by the Victoria Airport Authority. 1, that the proposal includes a spray application booth or area and paint mixing room. 2, that oil grit separated interceptors are included as part of the drainage system for the expanded surface parking lot area. 3, that the civil engineer retained by the applicant communicate with the town's engineering department regarding civil design in order to resolve any issues prior to the issuance of a building permit by the VAA. 4, that the proposed parking areas be revised to include loading spaces and ensure sufficient on-site maneuvering to loading bays. 5, that the proposed parking areas be revised to include additional accessible parking spaces. 6, that additional Class 1 and Class 2 bicycle parking be provided. 7, that their lighting be added within parking areas. And 8, that the perimeter fence be modified to provide a densely landscaped year-long visual barrier to screen parking and loading areas.
Second.
We haven't moved and seconded. I'll turn to the mover. Councillor Duff?
Nothing to add.
Councillor Gurnett?
I just want to comment. Thank you, staff, for the work on this and for the comments provided. And just this is a positive. It's a business doesn't expand unless they're successful. So this is a great story, and it's a good economic driver for our community. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no further comment, I'll just add to Councillor Gurnett. Council does appreciate this as an interdepartmental review across departments, and thanks staff for the work and the comments back to VAA. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? And that motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We're next turning to item 13C, which is the monthly building report for the month of October. We're receiving it for information. There's no motion required. Does colleagues have any questions for staff or comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, and that is under item 15. We are receiving 6 items of correspondence. For information, there's no motion required. They are on our agenda. And so I would turn to Councillor Garnett with advanced appreciation for reading our motion to go in camera.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll move that as in the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of the council and officers be excluded from the meeting to consider confidential matters regarding the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements pursuant to section 90.1E of the Community Charter, and that council continue the meeting in closed session.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Motion carries. A motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved and seconded by Councillor Novick. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, staff.